fish chips, peas, I think one of us carry sauce, 3 cans of pop, just short of 70 quid.
£70? That's 23 quid a head, man. Even my maths does that. Very quickly, a voice note. Campbell in Scotland, go.
Up here in Banff in the northeast of Scotland, we can get a fillet and a half of haddock with a regular chips for £8 and 10 pence, and it's by far and away one of the best chippies I've ever had.
Kenneth in Surrey, fish and chips, go.
Fish and chips in Ascot, about half a mile from where you used to live, will cost you £12 and 60 pence. Great show. Keep up the good work.
That's why I moved, because you were living there. When was the last time you had fish and chips?
Couple of weeks
How
ago.
much? Where'd you get it from?
I think it was about 40 quid. It was in the Ivy.
Honestly, you really are. For any of you who think he's a man of the people, I nearly said you're a...
Keeping it real.
Or on your smart speaker watching on YouTube or your connected device. It's great to have your company. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be talking more about that strategic defence review. Britain's armed forces aren't ready to fight a war against a military with similar capabilities. That's what the authors of Britain's review have warned. But the Prime Minister refused repeatedly yesterday to commit to spending the 3% of GDP on defence needed to make Britain battle ready. And if that sum is spent, how will it be funded? Oh, more tax rises, everybody. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Plus, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch has joined a number of people worrying about the impact of a creeping blasphemy law last night after the conviction of a protester who set fire to the Quran in front of the Turkish embassy. Hamit Çoskan, 50 years old, shouted "F Islam," and Islam is the religion of terrorism, before he was violently attacked by 2 men. Extraordinarily, the judge found him guilty of causing harassment, alarm or distress and disorderly behaviour because his actions had caused him to be attacked. Because he was attacked by people, that meant, of course, he must have caused that distress. How sick is that? Do we have a blasphemy law by the back door? We're going to be talking about that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Plus, the water sector in England and Wales is failing and needs stronger regulation to better protect both bill payers and the environment. That's according to the interim findings of a landmark review into the water industry. This comes amid concerns over the future of Thames Water. That's the UK's biggest water company, covers a fifth of the population after private equity giant KKR pulled out of plans to invest in the company and possibly save it from collapse. Will it have to be nationalised is the question. And Britain is pressing France to swiftly close a legal loophole that prevents police from stopping migrant boats in shallow waters off the French beaches amid growing frustration at French inaction. You know, the shrugging, the taking of videos, the smoking of the couloirs, rather than actually stopping the boats when they leave. This comes after 1,195 migrants crossed the channel in 18 boats on Saturday alone, marking a new daily record high for crossings this year. There'll be plenty more to come. It was only May then, it's only June now, plenty more summer months to come. So much more to talk about, so many things I want to hear from you on as well. And joining me for all the chat today, I'm delighted to say, regularly on a Tuesday, is editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. Very good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
I mean, where do we even start on some of these stories? Before we talk about Defence Review, because that is still on a lot of the front pages, I do want to ask for people's thoughts on that man who burned the Quran. Now, we broke the story about 12:30 yesterday. We actually had Sam Armstrong from the Free Speech Union in the studio. He's actually been working on that case with the Free Speech Union, with Hamit Çoskan, and he was convicted. Now, this is sparking warnings of a backdoor blasphemy law. I want to know your reaction to that. How concerned are you? Give us a call on 0344 499 1000, text on 87222, get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate, text costs £1, standard network rate message. I'd love to hear from you. Do you think it was wrong that he was convicted? Do you think actually, you know what, people shouldn't go around burning holy texts from people's religions, and that there should be a law against it? Do we have a blasphemy law but only for one religion, and that religion of course is Islam? Do you think if he burned a Bible there'd have been a prosecution? Would he have been attacked for doing so as he was? We'll talk about all of that in just a couple of moments. I do want to hear your thoughts on that. But first up, Tom, and I know you've written a brilliant piece in Spiked on that as well. But let's talk about this Defence Review. We have disputed Defence Reviews periodically, and we've got a whole load of national security strategies coming up. We also, crucially, next week have a spending review, sort of setting out the spending plans for the next few years of government, and of course we'll have a budget later this year. And a lot of people are saying, how are all these commitments to get Britain battle ready going to be paid for? We're talking about, new nuclear powered subs. We're talking about munitions factories. We're talking about, gap year military cadets and the like. I'm in favour of us getting battle ready. I've been very consistent on this. I from all the military experts I speak to and foreign policy experts over the last few years, they are very, very concerned about the military threat posed by Russia, by China, by Islamist terrorists, Iran and others, that we need to be getting very serious about defending our country and indeed our allies. I think Ukraine should have been a massive wake-up call in 2014, let alone 2022. This defence review basically says we are not ready to fight a war. They say that it's 3% of GDP cost to get us closer to that point, and the things that have been outlined. The government has accepted all the recommendations in the review. Of course they did. They assigned the people to carry out the review. That's what they do. But there was no absolute commitment from the Prime Minister yesterday or from the Defence Secretary yesterday or indeed this morning in the media round that we would hit that 3% GDP. So a lot of people are saying, well, are we going to actually be battle ready or have we not got the money, in which case do we have to put taxes up? What are your concerns and thoughts?
I mean, as ever, it was a lot of staging, a lot of noise, a lot of rhetoric about the need to be battle ready, even using the phrase, we need peace through strength. And yet, when you look through the details, it's the same kind of bean counting, really. I mean, 3% is increasingly looking like the kind of floor that will be expected for various countries across the West, and yet that's become a kind of jam tomorrow promise, really. It might happen in the next government. Who knows if there will be a next Starmer government, to be perfectly frank.
I was going to say, everyone's a bit optimistic, aren't they? Looking at the polls?
Exactly. So it's one of those things where, of course, there will be individual measures that will be welcomed by certain parts of the armed forces. The Navy will be relatively happy with what has been announced here. The fact that they are acknowledging that you could fit the British Army almost into a very large football stadium is obviously a absurd state of affairs, given the world that we now live in. Again, it feels like tinkering. Any problem that this government engages with, doesn't matter how large or small, all they can really do is tinker around the edges. And I think this is another example.
And that is the thing. I almost feel sorry for them. I know. I'm as shocked as you are that they've sort of, basically playing past the parcel with the getting Britain battle ready, and the music has stopped. And you're holding the parcel now, John Healey and Rachel Reeves to a certain extent as well. But ultimately, this is going to be the Prime Minister's decision. If you want to get us battle ready, you're going to have to spend a shed load more money. It's as simple as that. We also need to be spending it more wisely. I think, was it Margaret Hodge, when she was on the Public Accounts Committee as an MP, they found £8 billion of waste in the defence budget. I mean, that procurement is shocking. I mean, everybody who's been involved in procurement at MOD needs to be sacked on the spot and bring in new people who can actually negotiate a deal. And also, once you procured something, you don't get to change the contract 5 times, because each time you do that, contract doubles in cost. I mean, that's what's been happening. We need to be more sensible on that, and people need to be a bit more careful about the taxpayers' money. But there is, Mike Graham and I were discussing, there's actually a lot of leeway in the system in terms of there's a lot of things that government spends money on, which a lot of people, including me, and I think including you as well, would happily have them not spend money on. Obviously they're taking a load of money from the foreign aid budget, putting it in the defence budget, all in favour of that. It's a good way of just getting rid of that mad foreign aid budget. A lot of it doesn't go on anything useful. We absolutely want to be helping people in times of crisis, but no, I don't think we should be giving funding to places like China and India. If you've got your own nuclear programme, or your rocket programme, I'm not sure you need funding from British taxpayers. Sort your own country out, is my view. But net zero is crucial here. The net zero cost is so astronomical. I mean, what Tory Chancellor as was Philip Hammond estimated at least £1 trillion by 2050, and the rest. It won't work. It's pointless. It's meaningless. It's a religious ideology rather than actually a sensible policy. You cannot build back our industry. You cannot build back our economy. And there was a lot of talk yesterday about you need to have a strong economy to have a strong military. You need a strong military to have a strong economy, interestingly. We're not going to be able to do any of that while you've got sky-high energy prices, and we're not even able to have our own secure energy needs. At any point, Russia could just go and cut a couple of cables in the North Sea. we are in very dangerous territory.
I think you're absolutely right. I think if the cost of living crisis didn't destroy net zero, then certainly the heightened geopolitical tensions just might. I mean, we're in a situation where these untested, costly, ridiculous green schemes are still being held on to, even at a time when they're having to make quite painful decisions on spending that could affect ordinary people's lives, as well as the fact that they're having to, go to these international conferences, say that they're going to take all these things seriously, and then promise, another 0.5% maybe in 5 years. We'll see what happens. It's at some point they've got to choose: do they want net zero, or do they want the defence commitments they've made, or even the spending
and the strong economy, but also the nonsense of, well, we can't afford to give a winter fuel allowance to all pensioners, but we're going to try and change it. Why can't they afford their fuel in the winter? Oh, because our energy prices are really high. Why are energy prices high? Because of the net zero policy. There is so much circular madness going on in government, in terms of they push prices up from the cost of everything up and make everything insecure, and they go, oh, we need to do something about that. Well, duh, you do.
And wanting to rearm whilst you're destroying your steel industry and things like this. It's what remains of your steel industry. None of it makes sense, but I think it's exactly what you said. It's a religious belief, in effect, and that's why they find it so hard to drop. And
they're going to have to drop it. There is no question. And as and when Russia invades a Baltic state, and we are required under Treaty 5 of the NATO treaty to go under Article 5 of the NATO treaty to go to their defence, and we darn well should. At that point, all of that stuff's going to go out the window, because we're going to have to properly rearm, and we are not able to protect ourselves right now, let alone any of our allies. And I'm sorry, that's not good enough. And it's not being a warmonger. I want to avoid war. Is a terrible, terrible thing. Unfortunately, sometimes war is necessary, and I think pacifism is one of the most immoral stances that people can have. This idea, we're going to war. Well, okay, well, let's all just speak German and be ruled by the Nazis, and let's make sure that every Jew was killed in the 1940s. I mean, that's what pacifism means. Sometimes you have to fight against evil people like Xi Jinping, like Vladimir Putin, like Adolf Hitler, like the mullahs of Iran. Sometimes you have to take them on, because no, you can't just sit down and talk with them. It doesn't work like that. But the best way of taking them on would be that they know that they would be obliterated if they went to war and threatened any of our interests or our allies or us. That's the best way that you prevent war, is the mutually assured destruction, even just the sort of, or at least your assured destruction. We will fight back. Don't mess with us. And there is not a single dangerous dictator in the world who thinks that we're a threat.
What's crazy as well, the sort of de-armament, whatever the right word is, of the UK has not necessarily been because we've been run by Jeremy Corbyn for the past 20 years.
No.
It's bred into, we've also been very willing to engage in some disastrous, adventurous foreign wars that we definitely didn't need to actually engage in. What has happened is it's just bred of complacency, of this idea that history is over, there's no more direct threats that are going to take place to us.
Ignoring experts.
Our way of life has conquered all before it, and there will never be any attempt to challenge it. So that's what's crazy about this. It'd be one thing if just pacifists had taken over and run the country for a while. This has happened from people. It's
tough-talking, flag-waving Tories, and Labour and but the other crucial thing is also is our politicians on a 24-hour news cycle, and you know what, the number of nurses that there are matters more in terms of the news cycle and than actually having tanks that may never ever be used. To me, it's like having insurance. You pay for content insurance, building insurance, travel insurance, whatever it is. If you think, oh, what a waste of money, I never needed it. No, you should be grateful you never need to use it. Life's gone well for you. Same as the tanks. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do get in touch. 0344 499 1000. Let's talk also about the war on the home front. The war for our democracy, our freedoms, our freedom of speech, freedom, the right to protest, the like, on the domestic front. This is a Turkish man. He's an atheist. He is actually an asylum seeker from Turkey because he'd been imprisoned, I think, for more than a decade because of his protest against the Islamification of Turkey, which has absolutely been happening under Erdogan. And this is Hamit Çoskan. He's been supported, I'm really, really proud to say, as a member of the Free Speech Union, by the Free Speech Union, also by the National Secular Society, another, I believe, fantastic organisation wanting to take religion out of our politics and our public world. And he basically, he burnt a Quran as a protest. He didn't do it outside a mosque. Whether or not that should make any difference, I don't know, but he didn't. He did it outside the Turkish embassy as a political protest. And while he was doing that, he shouted, F Islam. he shouted, Islam is, I should get the right
religion of terrorists.
Religion of terrorists, religion of terrorism. He was initially he was prosecuted under a different law. Now, I know you've written a piece on this. I want you to explain it. But he was basically convicted yesterday of disorderly behaviour within the hearing or sight of a person likely to be caused harassment, alarm or distress, motivated, the judge argued, by hostility towards members of a religious group, namely followers of Islam. This was contrary to the Crime and Disorder Act 1998 and the Public Order Act 1986. He's been convicted. He's not imprisoned. He's fined £240. To all intents and purposes, though, this was a fine for blasphemy, wasn't it?
In effect, if not in exact wording, that's exactly what's happened. I mean, if he had got up outside the Turkish embassy or anywhere and burnt a different kind of book, do we think this would have taken place?
Chili Cooper.
Exactly. If he stood up outside, Harry Potter world, burning one of those books, and he got attacked by a particularly passionate fan of Harry Potter, do we think that the judge would say, as he did in his ruling, that he was engaging in disorderly behaviour, and the proof is that someone attacked him with a knife? I mean, this is an absurd amount of victim blaming as much as anything
Let me
else.
explain exactly what happened to him as he held the book aloft, having burnt it. And
Absolutely. So one of the charges here is disorderly behaviour. He's holding the burning Quran aloft. There's a gentleman from a
let's not use the word gentleman.
There's a man from a building adjacent, shall we say, who takes notice. It starts remonstrating with him, goes away, comes back with a knife, knocks Hamit Joskin to the ground, threatens him, kind of slashes at him. Mercifully wasn't severely hurt. There was also a delivery rider who was going past who kicked Joskin while he was on the ground.
Do we know if either of those two men have been prosecuted? I know we're not allowed to know the names of the man who's alleged to have had the knife.
Yeah, he is in the process of wending his way through the criminal justice system. I don't think his trial has taken place as yet. The delivery rider, I'm not sure if anyone ever actually caught up with him. But in this case, what's so fascinating is you read the judgment, and the judge essentially says, of course he was behaving disorderly, and that proof of that was the fact that two men assaulted him. So if you're assaulted because someone is offended by what you say, then you
by
can be
definition,
criminalised under
you
the
must
Public
have...
Order Act. It's incredible.
I mean, exactly. I mean, I think you made a point. You made a whole article about this, but the point is really so if a woman walks down the street wearing a very short miniskirt and her maybe low-cut top, and she gets raped, that's kind of proof that she was being provocative, right?
No, absolutely. She was asking for it. He was asking for it in this case. It's obscene. Another point that the judgment tries to make. So you've got the disorder charge, and you've also got this charge of religiously motivated public order offence. And he says that whilst Hamit Joskin might say to us that he is motivated by a dislike of the religion rather than the followers of Islam, you kind of can't separate out the two. So,
I mean, you can.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, I think you should be able to hate anyone, anything. I think that's up to individuals.
Yes, I believe the right
that
hate and love are the opposite sides of the same coin. I've never understood. You're not allowed to physically hurt, physically threaten or abuse people because you hate them.
Absolutely.
That's against the law already. You don't need hate speech or anything for that. But you should be allowed to hate anyone you want to.
No, absolutely, but
it's normal human emotion.
Because otherwise you get into the position where someone has to decide what is hate, what isn't hate, and invariably it's some numpty like this who doesn't care one bit for freedom of speech.
And what if he hated Brexiteers? No, seriously. Would he have been prosecuted for that?
If he hated the adherents of a particular political ideology, if he was screaming F Tories, would we take that as seriously? So even on its own terms, I think this judgment is very concerning, but it's of a piece, isn't it, with the kind of drift of
But it's interesting, the judge, this is John McGarver, hang your head in shame, District Judge John McGarver. He claims, he said, well, the defence of Joskin was his religious issues with the religion, not his followers. He said Joskin's belief that Islam is an ideology which encourages its followers to violence, paedophilia and a disregard for the rights of non-believers. Well, I mean, depending on which reading of Quran, but again, you could argue the Old Testament, eye for an eye, encourages violence. But certainly in terms of Islamist, I mean, his concern is Islamism. Islam is not Islam, the religion, I believe. Then you've got there was an extraordinary encouragement of violence when it comes to the rights of non-believers. In many countries, many Muslim countries, leaving the religion, apostasy, is punishable by death. That is the case. Paedophilia, look, this is about girls being able to be married at a very young age. I mean, but whether it doesn't matter whether what he believed was true or not true of any particular religion or any particular followers of any religion, he has a right to believe it, doesn't he?
No, absolutely. I mean, this is what happens when you have laws around quote-unquote religious hatred, right? You have a situation where you have a judge or a police officer having to adjudicate on what a faith does and doesn't mean. I mean, they have to become like kind of, you know...
religious scholars.
Exactly, like imams for a day, to say that this isn't fair. It's a bit like when we had during the hate marches, that demonstration which was calling for jihad against Israel, and you had the Metropolitan Police have to come out and reveal their view on Quranic scripture and what it might mean.
What jihad actually meant.
It's this absurd, which is why you shouldn't have the state getting involved in defining what any ideology means, what hatred means in particular situations. This is the rabbit hole.
He didn't threaten anybody. He didn't abuse anybody. He was no... I mean, again, the only reason there... Let's be honest. The only reason he was arrested and charged and convicted was because he burnt a particular book. If he had desperately offended fans of Harry Potter or Jilly Cooper or Lord Archer, I mean anybody at all, there would not have been a prosecution of him. If he had burnt the Bible outside the Houses of Parliament, he would not have been prosecuted. I think perhaps we should test that, to see if that itself, if someone is offended by it. But the fact that the judge viewed that the fact that two men attacked him physically, the fact that they attacked him proves that what he'd done was a crime. Should we not just be worried about the people who attack people who are doing a peaceful protest? When we think about the Batley Grammar School teacher, still in hiding all these years later for committing no crime whatsoever, showing a picture of the Prophet Muhammad to a religious studies class to explain what that debate was about with Charlie Hebdo. I'm not aware that anyone who made those very credible death threats to him on social media have been prosecuted. I'm not aware of a single person. The young lad in Wakefield who brought the Quran into school after losing a bet, and it got a bit scuffed, and then his mum had to put on the shroud and go and basically beg for her son's life in the local mosque. That's with a police officer the local chief constable next to her. One of the most degrading and, I think, game-changing moments in our society. We will live through the day that happened. I'm not aware of anybody who made death threats against her son or her family being prosecuted. I mean, it defies belief. Do we have a blasphemy law now?
I mean, we have one by the back door, certainly. We have a
but only for one religion.
And that's exactly true. I mean, if you think about all of the scandals that we've had in recent years, where the law has been involved. So you've had this Quran burning. There was also one a couple of weeks before. Alec Hoskin in Manchester, the gentleman there pleaded guilty very quickly. So
still waiting for the sentencing.
Absolutely, still waiting for the sentencing, but that's another case. There was a case a few years ago of a Belfast preacher who was hauled through court on communications offences for calling Islam satanic because it was live streamed on the internet. So we do not see this when it comes to any other religion, and I dare say we know why that is the case.
Yeah, exactly. I want to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, your thoughts on the Defence Review, anything else we'd talk about, but particularly, do we now have a blasphemy law by the back door? And what do we do about it? 03444 499 1000 is the number to call. We'll get your calls up next. This is Talk.
Greta's journey as well, it's just so cliched, isn't it? I mean, she's gone from the annoying little truant to lecturing people at the UN about climate, and now she's a pro-Palestinian Gaza flag waver. And it just shows you just how vacuous all of that nonsense is. You know, it's the protest for protest's sake. What does she even actually know about any of this? She's a rent-a-crowd, rent-a-gob, bandwagon jumping, irritating little twerp.
To get this one's going to end up. Hey, it's going to end up in the European Court, isn't it? That's the irony. Mandy says, why is the government and the Crown Prosecution Service introducing blasphemy laws through the back door? This is another anti-British act by this Islamism pandering establishment. Joe says, just another day in Starmer's Stasi Britain. Trevor says, if it was any other religion, there would have been no consequences. Absolutely. David says, disgraceful to prosecute him. What's happening to free speech? Jay says, this needs to be appealed and crushed in the higher courts. The offence should never be illegal. Should never be illegal. And Stuart says the Lord just seems to be on the side of Islam. They're protected in every way. This country needs to wake up pretty damn quick. Let's go to Adrian, who is in Perth and wants to talk about this blasphemy law by the back door. Adrian, good morning to you.
Good morning, Julian. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Oh, thanks for calling. What do you make of this prosecution and this conviction?
I find it really hard because, I mean, I'm about fourth generation British, and my family fought in the First World War, Second World War, for the very nature of freedom of speech. And I think when that is taken away, we're living in a very dangerous society. I think that governments should try to prohibit hateful, incisive speech, but I think that many governments, and I think this government I'm bordering on, may abuse their authority because I'm concerned that they're wanting to silent peaceful dissent by passing laws and criminalising.
Well, they haven't passed a new law on this. Again, this is the interpretation of the law. I mean, you know, was it 17 years ago the blasphemy laws got thrown out, and that was 30 years after they'd last been used. But haven't you got yourself into a twist just there with what you said? I think the government should prohibit hateful speech and incitement, but this thing. Why? Why should the government? Why should anyone? Why should anyone be involved? Yeah. I think people should be allowed to be hateful. I think I should be allowed to say, I hate Tom Slater.
Yeah. Well, I don't. I like Tom Slater.
I adore and admire Tom Slater. But I should be allowed to hate him and to say I hate him, shouldn't I?
But he is one of the few people I do like.
What? Oh, what are the few? Honoured.
Sorry,
you, your mum, and me, your mum, and Adrian. We're the only people who like you, know.
I shouldn't have used the word prohibit. I think government should not encourage hateful speech. And I think, like you, I think everybody has got the right to express themselves.
Yeah.
And I class myself as a Christian and a good Christian. And I know you're atheist, but if I was coming out of a Catholic church and I saw somebody burning a Bible, it wouldn't upset me. I would just do a prayer and walk on. That's what I would do. I would think they had got the right to burn the Bible.
Yeah.
And so, no, the word prohibit I shouldn't have used. I think everybody has got the right to express themselves. And I think this country is getting fearful of expressing themselves.
Yeah, but only with one religion. Look, I wouldn't go. I'm an atheist, but I wouldn't burn someone's religious text out of certainly outside their place of worship, as a matter of courtesy and good manners and showing mutual respect. But the difference is you can't burn a copy of the Quran because someone will try and kill you for that, and you'll be in hiding for the rest of your life, and so will your family. That's a different thing, isn't it?
And then where does it stop? Do you arrest somebody because they're homophobic and they shout a homophobic remark?
Well, they do, yes, they do arrest that. They do arrest it. I don't think people should shout out homophobic things at people. That's harassment. That is against the law and should be. I think gay people have the right to walk down the street, same as straight people do, without someone shouting abuse at them.
Well, I think I've grown
But if someone wants to go to Speaker's Corner and say, I think homosexuality is an abomination and is a sin, they should be allowed to say that. I disagree with them, but they should be allowed to say that.
Yeah, I think they should be allowed to say whatever they want, and I think anybody should be allowed to say whatever they want.
Okay.
I grew up in the 60s and 70s as a gay man, and I think I've got a resilience now, and I feel sorry for people who say racist or homophobic.
Yeah, absolutely. But we can judge, but we don't need to actually criminalise them. Adrian, thank you very mumuch indeed. Now, I know John is waiting to talk about defence. John, I'm going to come to you after I speak to my next guest, because I've got the former Defence Secretary Liam Fox waiting to talk on the line after a break, and I'd love to hear what you have to say after Liam Fox has spoken. So do please stay on the line if you would. We're going to take a quick break right now, then we will be talking to Sir Liam Fox. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 10:35 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Delighted to welcome now to the show former Conservative Defence Secretary Sir Liam Fox. A very, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. I want to talk to you, obviously, about this strategic defence review. These happen periodically. We've got a national security review coming up. We've also, crucially, got the spending review from the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, next week, when she's going to talk about long-term spending plans. Big debate going on about Britain not being battle-ready. I think everyone's agreed on that. We are not battle-ready right now. We need to get ourselves on more of a war footing. The big issue there is that how much money we put towards that and how we fund it. Do you believe that we are going to be spending a minimum of 3% of GDP on our defence in the next few years?
I don't know, is the answer to your question.
I don't think the Defence Secretary knows either.
I think the country doesn't know because the government hasn't set it out. I think there are two separate issues here, Julia. The first is the defence review itself, and does it move Britain into a better posture in terms of our defence? The answer would be yes, if it was fully funded and implemented. It makes sense to be increasing our maritime capabilities to improve our submarines, and I'm glad that the government didn't fall into the trap of trying to increase the size of the army, when what we really need as an island nation is better maritime capability. So that's a good thing. Better munitions capabilities and production, again, that's a good thing if that appears and it's funded. So there were good things in the defence review, as you would expect from being carried out by someone as experienced as Lord Robertson, former Defence Secretary and former head of NATO. So that's fine. But here is the age-old problem that we have in Britain. We have a history of producing defence reviews that are utterly dislocated from the spending review. Yeah. And so they tend to become wish lists rather than solid defence proposals. And that is the danger. There's a danger that we're sending a signal out as a nation to those who would wish us harm, that we know what we need to do, but we're not willing to find the money to do it.
Yeah, we've just flagged to Russia and China and Iran and everyone else. We're not ready. We need to spend a lot more. We need a lot more munitions, as you say, and jets and nuclear-powered submarines and everything else. And we may or may not spend the money. But the reality is, and you'll know this as a former Defence Secretary, 2010 to 2011, that was in the austerity years under David Cameron and George Osborne. The Defence Secretary doesn't set the budget for defence. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor do. And if you haven't got the money, you can't do it. But should we make sure that no matter what, we find that money? Because I don't even think, and talking to a lot of military experts, I'm sure you still do all the time, that even 3% cuts the mustard.
Well, it depends what you're spending the money on, of course.
True.
And there's a couple of extra questions from yesterday, because the Prime Minister has said that the definition of defence spending will be updated to recognise what our security and intelligence agencies do. So does that mean that we're now going to be changing the definition of our defence spending to make sure that we meet the target? We don't know if these changes would meet the NATO definition of defence spending, nor do we know if this new Chagos deal is going to actually count in the defence spending total. So,
and that's again, what it's been disputed, but at least a £9 billion cost.
Over time, and we don't know whether that's going to be counted now as our defence spending, because it's clearly not what your listeners would think of as an increase in the spending.
No, and it certainly doesn't increase our safety. I know certainly, but even in your time, the 2.3% spent on defence, that included veterans' pensions. Now, I'm sorry, as valuable and important as that is, it's not actually helping our defence capability.
No, but it depends whether it's part of the NATO definition of defence spending. We have to keep within that. But here's the problem here, that we don't know what this will be. So the 2.5%, which the government said they will meet by 2027, is a clear commitment. But are they changing the definitions to meet that? And secondly, the 3% commitment. They've said it's an ambition in the next Parliament. Well, number one, they may not be the government in the next Parliament. Yep. We're assuming that it's a 4-year Parliament. That means somewhere between 2028 and 2032. How does that happen? And an ambition is not good enough if you're placing contracts for long-term equipment programs, for example. Real businesses need real money, not ambition.
Yeah, I realised yesterday, I was listening to a defence expert, a defence industry expert, that the government also spends money, their budgets. It's year to year, April to April, and actually, they make these payments and they can't plan anything long term. We're going to have to change that system. But Lord Dannett, the former head of the British Army, was on the show yesterday, and he said what we're asking right now in terms of looking at our defences and trying to get battle ready is equivalent to basically in 1937 the British government going to Adolf Hitler and saying, would you mind not invading anywhere till 1946 when we might be ready?
Well, there's a question. We didn't have NATO, of course, in those days, and we've got the full capability of the United States as part of NATO.
Well, we hope so.
Well, it is not entirely comparable, the situation, nor are we threatened as directly as we were by Nazi Germany. So I think we've got to also be careful about not producing unnecessary fear and panic in it. But we do need, as the United Kingdom, and as NATO as a whole, especially European NATO, to be improving our position. Now, there's a question here about how NATO is organised, frankly, which is not really being addressed. No country apart from the United States is big enough to be a full spectrum in terms of defence, i.e. able to do everything. Yeah. In Britain, we are carrying the cost of our nuclear deterrent. We are now increasing our nuclear submarine capability. We've got our carrier strike capability with the 2 big carriers that we have that no other European country has. Obviously, our complement of F-35s, which are interoperable with the United States fully and have done, for example, in the South China Sea. So we're carrying a great deal of that. The question is, what are the other NATO countries doing to carry other elements of that risk? If Britain is spending more on cyber and we're carrying nuclear deterrent, we can't be expected to carry the land forces required for the defence.
Because our nuclear capability is basically pledged to NATO to protect Europe.
It is. Yeah. It's part of all of that. So we're carrying a fairly large proportion of that, and even the modest changes would take us up the NATO spending league again. And we're one of the world's biggest defence countries. but what is happening across NATO to make sure that European NATO is able to carry a load that is both able to defend us and politically able to deal with the quite understandable resentments from the United States that Europe's not carrying enough of the defence load. So none of these questions have really been answered.
No, and probably won't be. I mean, even leaving aside all valid points about the change definition, whether it's an ambition or an actual target is actually going to be reached, all of that. And I mean, we obviously talk about things like, for instance, how we actually, we've actually commissioned this stuff, and we end up spending often massive amounts more than we need to as well. That's a massive issue there. But the main concern right now for a lot of people is we should have enough weaponry so that we can fight a war if we need to. We can defend our allies if we need to, because of the threat that is very, very real right now from Vladimir Putin and indeed from Xi Jinping in China. Not to us directly, but again, these wars have a funny habit of impacting us. But how we would pay for all of this. Now, as you say, we can, move things around in the accounts. But fundamentally, this stuff costs an absolute fortune. However good the procurement deal is, it's going to cost in the many, many, many billions. How should that be paid for? Will there have to be tax rises?
Well, I think the tax rises would impact the ability of the economy to grow, to ultimately fund the defence budget. I think that if you're going to recognise that defence is not a discretionary spend. Defence is the number one duty of the government, to protect its country and its people. And therefore, that has to be the first spend. And if that means cutting back and holding back on spending in other areas, that's the more prudent thing to do. If we can't borrow anymore, we're already spending too much on debt interest, and we shouldn't be taxing anymore, because I think that would slow down the very economic growth that would produce the benefits.
What would you cut then? One of the suggestions we're making is, all the net zero commitments, which of course make us less energy secure, increase the price of our energy as well, have huge cost to the economy, to industry. That would be a really obvious policy to drop to give us more funding, wouldn't it?
Well, our energy costs are quite detrimental to our ability to grow our economy at the present time. I mean, we need to look at...
And to build anything.
But I think we also have to look at our welfare budget. I think we also have to look at the fact that we've got huge numbers of economically inactive people in our country, and whether we need substantial welfare reform to make it much more attractive to go to work and much less attractive not to be in work.
Can I also ask you, I mean, it's a fair question, isn't it, really? I mean, given it's all very well for former Conservative defence ministers and secretaries of state to come on and say, well, we should be spending more. I mean, you guys, I know you weren't in power the whole time, but your party was in power for 14 years, as we saw actually our defence forces, eking out an existence. Do you think the 14 years of Conservative government, and indeed I would say Labour government before then, actually hold a moral responsibility for the failure here?
Well, the first 5 years of that so-called Conservative government was a coalition government, which had to deal with the massive legacy of the debt left behind by Labour, and the fact that the MOD was overspent by between 39 and 55 billion over the decade. So that had to be dealt with of gross economic and departmental mismanagement. And then, of course, we had the period of the pandemic, which again was extraordinarily difficult. I think that what you need to do is accept that the Rishi Sunak government, which suddenly looks much more appealing than it did even a year ago to voters, was actually set out its defence spending in actual numbers year by year, so that people would know what we were going to spend. This government hasn't carried that forward. But I think the one thing that you need to look at, Julia, is over this period is there's no doubt that the risk has got bigger.
Yeah.
Much bigger now than it was, say, in 2020. The risk is clearly bigger today. And governments have to, as I said, recognise, number one, defence is not a discretionary spend. You have to spend what you have to spend. And then you have to make the judgments elsewhere on taxation, on spending elsewhere, whether to make that happen. What governments cannot do is, at a time when the risk is going up, to try to use smoke and mirrors to pretend that it's spending more on defence when it may not actually be doing so.
Sir Liam Fox, former Conservative Defence Secretary, very much appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much. Let's go to a caller, John, who's in Lewis. He's given us a call on 0344 499 1000. John, I said I wanted to go to you after heard what Sir Liam Fox had to say. What do you want to say about the Defence Review?
Well, Julia, everything you've said so far is correct. I agree with everything you've said. But as an ex-serviceman, there is no way I would fight for king and country at the moment.
Why?
Especially this king. He's meant to be defender of the faith. That's his only job. During the Act of Settlement, we passed over all dozens of legitimate British heirs to the throne to hand the throne to some random German Hanoverian dynasty. That's King Charles's dynasty.
Okay, well, same with the Queen, but you were an ex-serviceman and you fought for. I mean, I know we talk about fighting for king and country or queen and country, but actually you're fighting for your fellow citizens, are you not? I mean, look, I'm not a monarchist, so I wouldn't. If I were fighting, I wouldn't be fighting for the royal family. I'd be fighting for my fellow countrymen and women. Why would you not fight? Would you not fight for your own children's future?
Well, Sir Liam Fox mentioned the nuclear deterrent earlier. We haven't got one. If we fix that, then there'd be no chance of anyone invading
What do you mean? What do you mean if we don't have one?
Well, we tested our nuclear deterrent twice on the trot,
and it didn't work.
It failed both times.
Right.
So why just put a bit of money into fixing that? Then we won't have to worry about anyone invading us.
Well, I mean, again, I don't think it's just about someone invading us. It's more about our allies that we have a duty of care to, and preventing the situation where someone could invade us.
Well,
you're not throwing a nuclear weapon. You're not launching nuclear weapons at Russia if they invade the Baltics. They're not.
No, of course they're not.
So we need other fighting forces.
Well, we're not capable of producing such forces. We just aren't. And part of the reason is we're spending all this money on net zero. We're spending this money to Ukraine, who we have got no agreement with.
We're sending the money to Ukraine to try and keep Russian forces from having a victory in Ukraine and then moving to the next country.
Yeah, the Ukrainians who most people couldn't point to on a map. And
I think we could now. We didn't know where the Falklands were. Did you know where the Falklands were before the Falklands were invaded by Argentina?
Oh, yes, I did, actually.
Well, lucky you, I didn't. I was a kid, but I still thought it was good that we defended them. Look, John, I'm so frustrated because I really want to stay with you, but I've got to go to a break and I've got to get to another guest. I'm mortified. Thank you so much. We covered a lot of ground. Cole back in again. I do want to hear more on your views. We're going to take a quick break. This is Talk.
In terms of the sort of technology they're using, this radar search will be able to show, ground that may have been disturbed, even though it was, 18 years ago. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, I mean, technology has moved on enormously since the time when Madeline went missing. New ideas have come forward. Radar is used in a lot of areas to get a profile of what's happening under the surface, to give some indications as to where to look and where to conduct further searches.
Right.
So it's another useful tool that they can employ.
Looking set to get some 50,000 crossing the Channel this year on current estimates. Let's talk about this with Stephen. Good morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Now, we were going to stop the boats under Rishi Sunak. We're going to smash the gangs under Keir Starmer. It doesn't seem to be working very well at all. Spoke to one of the defence ministers about this on the show yesterday. Like, how are we going to stop an invading force? We can't even stop a bunch of blokes without even passports, let alone rifles in dinghies. But now there's a kind of a pushback on the French. I thought we were all going to be nicey-nicey with the French, as well as give them £500 million, and then they'd stop the boats. But apparently now there's an issue with the French laws that prevent them from stopping them. Explain.
Well, yes, they've been saying for quite some time that the French laws prevent them from instituting international law, which they've signed, which is the law of the sea, that enables countries to go in and stop people smugglers from being able to use those boats. And what they're saying is they've got a combination of their own equivalent similarities to human rights laws and also safety towards the employees that will prevent them from being able to go in and actually stop the boats. So they need to change some of their kind of constitutional laws and go through the courts in order to be able to do what we would normally require as a simple, sensible thing, which is, as your images are showing, pull those people back from dangerous boats.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, they are unsafe in those waters, in those overcrowded dinghies. The safest and best thing to do would be to stop them from going off. We've had some pictures on the weekend of the French police videoing and smoking their cigarettes, watching these guys get on these boats. Now, I understand often these boats appear in the water. They don't, like, blow them up and launch them on the beach, because then they could be taken by the police. But they basically, motor them in to the shallow waters, and then all the migrants run forward and go to get in the boat. Are they seriously saying it wouldn't be possible for them to stop that?
Well, of course, they would be able to stop that if they have the will. The Belgians have been doing this for some time, which is why that the Belgians do not have such a massive issue. Of course, that part of the channel also is incredibly dangerous in terms of the waves and the tides, so there's not used as much. But the Belgians take that approach that rather than videoing them and sitting there with a nice chitan and waiting for a coffee and being able to give these people an opportunity, even maybe push them out, so they get to the Brits, they actually decide to actually stop them. Yeah. And so they also understand that the law of the sea, SOLAS, enables them to prevent this from happening. And so I'm glad that at least the British government are recognising that the French have this problem, but they're not stopping the boats. And Julia, as I pointed out over the weekend, when we had 1,150 arrive, it hit a magic figure for people smugglers. £1 billion is what the people smugglers have earned in revenue since 2018 in the 4,500 boats that they've used. Wow. This is enormous money being used by evil people, which funds criminality across the continent.
I'm wondering how much tax they pay on that £1 billion of income. I think we all are we not? But this is the thing, we're paying out of our taxpayers' money £500 million to the French to stop the boats. Now, the argument from the British and French governments has been they have stopped a lot more of the boats, but yet I don't know how they're stopping all these boats, and yet poor people are getting through, other than the fact, of course, they're now piling 50 onto a boat instead of 20 on a boat. Boats are getting bigger, but also they're getting more dangerous.
They are. I mean, these are not really small boats. These are actually very large boats, and I think that the data should turn away from calling it small boats crisis to a huge boat crisis, quite frankly. And these are actually much more visible by drones. You should be able to stop them quite easily. So that's one of the factors that they've got. And quite is actually astonishing about this is the lack of interaction between the police and our border forces on the boats. I do admit, and I will say, that the French are beginning to stop more of them early on. Yeah. And we used to get figures from the Home Office that showed exactly what they're doing. And all of a sudden that stopped.
Funny that.
When you look at the data, I don't see it anymore. And so it is not really very helpful to governments say that we are working with the French and then remove the figures that prove that.
Yeah. It would suggest that they're not. Here's the thing, though. If we do see crackdowns, as many European countries are talking about doing in terms of really tackling this issue and getting returns deals and the like, are not more of those migrants going to try and make their way to Britain?
Well, there is an argument for that. The 4 top countries that receive the asylum seekers who are being run by these gangs from Afghanistan, Iran and Iraq and Somalia actually are Italy, Germany, France and the UK. And as you saw with the riots in Paris over the weekend as a result of that, you're already seeing in Paris nearly 35% of Paris and 50% in certain of the areas that are controlled by people who are connected to the migrant crisis there. Yeah. So they have a massive problem, and it's in their interest to shove it to Britain.
Absolutely. And again, as soon as they get on those boats, not our problem anymore. Sorry about the accent. Stephen Wolfe, always great to talk to you. I always worry the fact that Stephen Wolfe at the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity knows a heck of a lot more about this subject than any of the government ministers I've ever interviewed on it, which is a little bit of a worry, isn't it? Anyway, lots more to talk about. I'm going to talk more about the Defence Review. Are you willing to pay more taxes? I want to know about the backdoor blasphemy law, which we've effectively brought in. And don't worry, I will be bringing Tom Slater back in. Lots more to talk about, including, by the way, that search for Madeline McCann's body in Portugal. All that coming up. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are not
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning. Welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, or on your connected device, it is lovely to have your company. Delighted to say Tom Slater, editor of Spike, is still here. Get to his views on many of the big topics of the day in just a couple of moments. We are going to be talking more about Britain's armed forces not being ready to fight a war against what's called a military with similar capabilities. We're talking about, well, I don't know, Russia or anyone else like that. That's what the Strategic Defence Review authors said yesterday. But refusal for the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary yet again to commit to spending that 3% of GDP on defence that would be needed to make Britain battle ready. Oh, and if they did spend that, how will it be funded? Can't borrow anymore. Can we tax us anymore? Is they going to be able to do that? Should we cut spending on things like welfare for able-bodied working-age people? What about small matter of net zero costing us many, many billions a year? That would also be needed to be cut simply to get us energy secure, would it not? We're also going to be talking about Madeline McCann. German detectives investigating her disappearance are to begin fresh searches close to the former Algarve home of the prime suspect in the case. Around 30 German police officers, along with forensic specialists, are examining a site on the outskirts of Praia de Luz where convicted paedophile Christian B, as he's known, was living at the time. Also, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch has joined many others, including us here at Talk, warning of the impact of creeping blasphemy laws last night after the conviction of a protester who set fire to the Quran in front of the Turkish embassy. This was Hamit Çoskan. He's 50 years old and he shouted, F Islam, and Islam is the religion of terror, before he was violently attacked by two men. Extraordinarily, the judge in the case found him guilty of causing harassment, alarm or distress because his actions caused him in some way to be attacked. Shouldn't we be more concerned about the people who attacked him rather than the man simply going about his totally legal right to burn a book of his choice? And we're also going to be talking about the water sector in England and Wales. It is failing and needs stronger regulation to better protect not just bill payers, but also the environment. Plans to invest in the company. It's Britain's biggest water company, serves a fifth of the entire population of this country, could lead to it to collapse. So we're going to talk about all of that coming up. I do want to hear from you. Defence Review is still sparking an awful lot of interest, a lot of calls, but particularly I want to hear from you about whether we now do have a blasphemy law by the back door after a man who burnt a Quran was found guilty of a public order offence. What's your reaction to that? Give us a call 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK and your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate and text cost £1, standard network rate message. Let's talk again to Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Lots of other topics I want to cover other than these two crucial topics, the Defence Review and blasphemy laws, and we'll get onto those. But in terms of the Defence Review, we spoke to Liam Fox, former Defence Secretary, and he raised some interesting points about how we're actually going to get to this 2.5% of GDP spending in 2027 and this 3% ambition, about whether we're going to probably be changing the definition of what counts as defence spending, or the Chagos deal and the multi-billion pound cost of surrendering territory, which includes a major military base, be included, and other things as well. And in reality, a lot of this is kind of meaningless because we shouldn't be talking about the cost, should we? We should be talking about what do we need to defend our country and indeed fulfil our commitments under the NATO treaty to our allies, given the threats from Russia and indeed from China and elsewhere. What do we need, and then fund it, because it shouldn't be an optional extra, should it?
No, absolutely. I mean, you should work out what you think is necessary to defend the nation and then work back from that standpoint, rather than say this is what currently the spreadsheets will allow for, and this is what currently we can pretty confidently say will be a target that we've got some chance of hitting, and therefore that's what the target is going to be. But this is Whitehall brain, this is Treasury brain, this is bean counters, technocracy, this is how politics works. And I think it's just so fascinating that even at a time where rhetorically they feel the need to make the point that the world has changed.
Yeah. It was all very strong rhetorically yesterday.
All that stuff. They still revert back to the old ways, and they still revert back to...
Computer says no.
Computer says no, and also we couldn't possibly think about trying to free up some money from, say, all the funds that are being just poured down the sink of net zero. It never kind of follows on from the more immediate.
Again, you need a strong economy to have a strong military. We can't have a strong economy with very expensive energy costs. That is a result of net zero policy. We can't have reliable and secure energy, which is absolutely, certainly electricity is absolutely vital in the event of any war. If Russia can cut cables from Norway, but it's all right. We're getting our electricity from Norway. Cut, done. No, we're not.
No.
I mean, no, we're not. And also, in the event of energy shortages, you think Norway's going to be giving their spare electricity to us as opposed to keeping it for themselves?
And you still need some vestige of an industrial base if you want to rearm, which is something that we're
to build
keen on.
ships and planes and.
I mean, this is the thing. A few weeks ago, they could be pretty blasé about the fact that we're losing our last few remaining blast furnaces and replacing them with these nowhere near good enough arc furnaces, these kind of green alternatives.
Which only, by the way, they can't build virgin steel,
which is essential to all kinds of different weaponry that you might be building. And yet, a few weeks later, they say it's absolutely desperately important that we rearm and we're put on a war footing. It doesn't make any sense.
It's failure of joined-up government, isn't it? And again, I mean, Liam Fox mentioned, and again, it is totally true. Well, I mean, I feel very sure, drop the net zero, that's a huge extra cost, and it makes us insecure, and it puts us at risk in every possible way. And we saw what happened in Portugal and Spain. I mean, come on, wake up, everybody. But welfare, we have got to get on top of the welfare, and that's for the moral good of the people and the health of the people who are currently languishing on welfare, who don't need to be. It is simply not possible that we have a uniquely sickly, mentally ill, disabled population compared to any other Western country as a result of COVID or anything else. It is simply not feasible, logically, that, isn't it miraculous how COVID hit us so much harder? So, all of our young people, are mentally ill. I mean, I'm sorry, it's a load of nonsense. The best thing for an awful lot of people who are currently languishing on some sort of incapacity or sickness benefit of some sort should actually be getting back into work, having a structure to their day, earning their own money, self-esteem, self-respect. But also, we can't afford to pay for you, and certainly not for a lifetime. And especially the young people, they're going to be on benefits forever. I don't want to pay for it. I refuse to pay for it. We've got this idea about getting more people in the military. Well, there you go. Get a job or you're in the military. Done. I mean, I think we need to be a bit more hardcore, and I don't think this government, or indeed the last government, are willing to make enough of the tough choices and to cope with. You're going to get a load of headlines on the BBC where you're going to have someone who's crying about how awful it is, how they can't cope. Yeah, and there are going to be sob stories, there always are. And there are going to be cases you get wrong. But fundamentally, we need to get all our people back to work.
Oh, no, absolutely. And it's a huge crisis for the people who are caught up in that system, all those perverse incentives, entire communities, entire families in some cases, who are kind of plagued by joblessness. And, whilst there's obviously always personal responsibility in there, there's also a hell of a lot of perverse incentives, which the system has been allowed to maintain. It gets covered up by imported cheap labour and all the rest of it. We know all of this. And it's because these things are difficult to deal with that politicians shy away from them.
Yeah.
And but now surely is the point in which the rubber hits the road on this front, but also many more, given there's so much. This is what I think what a lot of people are frustrated about is the fact that it feels like the fundamental responsibilities of government are being neglected. Meanwhile, they're chasing absurd policies like net zero, defence, making sure people who commit crimes are
non-crime hate incidents
locked up. You go after the speech criminals, not the shoplifters.
Disposable vapes,
everything.
They're constantly. It's all the minutiae, and just let's control the small number of people who still obey the law and ignore everybody else. I mean, that does feel like. Well, look, and that comes into our next story. What I'm asking you about this morning about this man. This is Hamid Choskan. I understand his name is pronounced. He's an asylum seeker from Turkey. He's been imprisoned in Turkey. He's an atheist. He has campaigned in Turkey and since here in Britain against what he calls the Islamification of Turkish, life, which has undoubtedly happened under Erdogan. It's something he's very much been pushing, and he basically decided to, and he's done it before, and he says he's going to do it again, to burn a copy of the Quran, his own book. He didn't steal someone else. He burned a copy of the Quran outside the Turkish embassy, not outside a mosque. Not that should legally make any difference, although I think a lot of people would feel differently about it, whilst shouting F Islam, saying Islam is the religion of terrorism. He was initially arrested under a different law, which basically the judge had to kind of throw out because it was basically so blatantly attempting to arrest him as under blasphemy law. But he's been convicted yesterday, fined £240 for, to all intents and purposes, blasphemy. Just read out what his conviction was for. Disorderly behaviour within the hearing or sight of a person likely to be caused harassment, alarm or distress, motivated by hostility towards members of a religious group, namely followers of Islam. This was a breach of the Crime and Disorder Act 1998 and the Public Order Act 1986. But the crucial point that was made by the district judge, John McGarver, who should hang his head in shame, is that the proof for him And he actually said this in court, that his proof for him, proof of his guilt, was that the conduct was disorderly is no better illustrated than by the fact that it led to serious public disorder involving him being assaulted by two different people. Now, you've written a fantastic piece for Spiked about this, Tom Slater. Explain what actually happened in this incident.
And this boggles the mind, doesn't it? So you have Hamit Coşkun, he's doing this protest outside the Turkish consulate, he's burning the Quran, he's saying F Islam and so on, all the details people may well have read about. It sparks this response. There's a man who's in a building nearby, comes out, starts to remonstrate with him, goes away, comes back with a knife, knocks Coşkun to the floor, slashes at him and so on. You also have a delivery rider who's going past who kicks Coşkun while he's on the floor. And in the ruling itself, in the judgment itself, I should say, the judge makes abundantly clear that precisely because he was attacked, precisely because these two men were so offended by what he was doing that they decided to be physically violent towards him, that proves that he was being disorderly under the Crime
But he
Disorder
was
Act.
causing such offences. But here's the thing.
I've made the point in the piece that he was lucky he wasn't wearing a short skirt as well. I mean, is that the kind of victim-blaming argument that is now acceptable?
I mean, yes, clearly in this case. But here's the thing. So if someone burns a book, whether it's, as mentioned earlier, G. Cooper or a Harry Potter book, you know, or the Bible, for instance, and no one attacks you with a knife, bearing in mind that the man who is alleged to have attacked him with a knife has denied carrying a knife. There is a criminal prosecution that's going through. They're not allowed to know his name. I don't know why we shouldn't be allowed to know the name of the man who's been charged with that crime. I think that's quite bizarre. But in this bizarre situation, if someone burnt a Bible and no one was actually offended enough to physically assault the person who was burning the Bible, by definition that wasn't a cause of disorderly behaviour, and therefore you wouldn't be prosecuted for it. I'm of the view that we should test this out, because it seems to me if the only book that you're not allowed to burn in this country is the Quran, we do have a blasphemy law in this country, abolished 17 years ago, hadn't been used, the blasphemy laws hadn't been used to prosecute anyone for 30 years before they were abolished in 2008. But we clearly have a blasphemy law, but only for one religion. And the reason why we have an unofficial de facto blasphemy law for that one religion is because some, not all, no one is saying all, some adherents to Islam, those who follow the Islamist ideology, the Safist, incredibly violent, you know, autocratic ideology, they believe that a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad, a burning of a Quran, desecration of the book in any way, even just the scuffing of it by a schoolboy in Wakefield, the showing of a Quran, of Prophet Muhammad's picture, a cartoon of him to schoolboys at a grammar school in Batley, that is so outrageous, is so blasphemous that should be punished by death, because that is what those people believe. Now, the reality is, other people in other parts of the world, in Europe included, have actually faced death for showing, burning the Quran or other acts perceived by some to be. But our politicians and our police appear to be too afraid to stand up to this. Now, as far as I'm aware, no prosecution of anyone involved in the death threats to the Batley Grammar School teacher still in hiding. No prosecution of anyone who made death threats to the family and the child involved in the Wakefield case, where the mum went and begged for her family's life at a mosque with a senior police officer next to her, wearing a little shroud. I mean, so she should have to spend the rest of her life living with her son, living in hiding. Why are there no prosecution of this? Why are the people who are threatening and using violence not being prosecuted, but the people who are apparently so so offensive doing these things being prosecuted and getting criminal records?
I mean, it's that age-old thing, isn't it, about actually going after the bad guys. A small number of people can do an awful lot of damage if they're allowed to get away with it, and that's the perfect example that we've seen here. There's been this growing kind of anti-blasphemy movement, which there's organisations, there's people who go and preach in mosques about this. It's largely
there are Labour
groups.
MPs calling for it.
Absolutely, and there are many groups from the subcontinent, particularly Pakistan, who are campaigning in this country and pushing for this. People have been ignoring this, as you say, people who have been engaging in threats, who are issuing these things over idiots issuing this stuff over Facebook and social media. It wouldn't be that hard to track these people down. And then you look going back to the Coşkun case and the judgment. you can look at that judgment in two different ways, both of which are kind of as bad as each other. On the one hand, is it suggesting that if you say something that offends someone so much that they try to stab you, it's a criminal offence in and of itself. I mean, we've heard the heckler's veto, there's like the stabber's veto. Is that a good precedent to set? Or are we saying, and I suspect that if he stood outside of a church or of anywhere else and burnt a copy of the Bible, and for some reason there was someone in the area so incensed by this that they assaulted him, I wouldn't have thought this case would actually have got to court. I think they would have gone after the person who tried to assault him, and that would have been that. I think there's cases of judges and prosecutors who are mangling our laws to this end because they think this is a way to keep the peace. It's not. It's the opposite. It's not a way. It fuels intolerance. It will make everything worse.
Absolutely, and it's giving in to the mob, and that's what it is. And the only reason, I mean, I would like to demonstrate my solidarity. The right people to. I wouldn't want to, but I don't want to burn any book. Genuinely, the worst book in the world I wouldn't want to burn. But I'd also, as an atheist, I wouldn't want to offend people who have religious beliefs by burning their sacred texts. But I think the right to freedom of speech and freedom of protest is so great that would be worth doing. Apart from the fact that I don't want me and my family to spend the rest of our lives in hiding. And that, as you say, that is a violent veto that only one religion has in this country. We have a blasphemy law by the back door, and it only involves one religion. What do we do about that, though? Because Kemi Bade not speaking up on it, but this happened under Tory watches before. We know the Labour government ain't going to do anything about it. They are completely running scared from what they think of as Muslim leaders in this country, community leaders, self-appointed, by the way. The 5 Gaza MPs for Gaza who were elected at the last election. What are we going to do about it? Because this is going to stir up a lot of, should we say, community tensions that they're so worried about, but it's also putting our fundamental freedoms at risk. And you need to be intolerant of intolerance in order to live in a tolerant society.
And we've got to stop capitulating to this, because if there is anyone who wants to go out and launch a campaign or give a speech or whatever saying that I think we should have a blasphemy law that covers Islam, that's entirely their right. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who are issuing death threats. We're talking about people who are organising to kill people. We're talking about campaigns which are very clearly trying to intimidate and menace and harass anyone if they dare step out of line. This is something that the criminal law could already take an interest in if they chose to, and they're not. So I think that's definitely the first step, is not acquiescing to these people out of fear at what message it might send. The message we do want to send is that this is not tolerated here, this kind of violent
I have
intimidation
absolutely no faith in our politicians, our police or the Crown Prosecution Service that they will deal with this. And I have a horrible feeling an awful lot of people are going to think they're going to have to take it into their own hands, and that way disaster lies.
Absolutely.
But don't say you weren't warned. But here we are. I don't know how long people are willing to put up with this, and why they should put up with this. Again, if you want to live in a country where you can't blaspheme against any particular book, there are plenty of countries you can go and live in. Not ours. Not ours. We're supposed to have protection here. That said, an awful lot of the Scandinavian countries that have stood very firm on this, they're toppling like dominoes on this as well. Let me also talk about Madeline McCann. It is extraordinary. She would be 22 years old now, Madeline McCann. It was when she went missing, believed abducted in Praia da Luz in Portugal all those years ago with her parents on holiday and out at a restaurant. I'm still, to this day, I do not understand how any parent could leave their almost 4-year-olds and 2 babies in a room on their own on the other side of a hotel while they go and get drunk. Sorry, I've always thought that was an insane, really bad decision of theirs, but I still wouldn't wish what happened to them on anyone. But they've searched for her. It's very, very clear now the search for her is very much a search for her body, not for her alive. But the German authorities are absolutely convinced this man, Christian Bruckner, is guilty of her abduction, rape and murder, or abuse and murder. And they have launched a search around roadwork trenches and the rat run of paths that Bruckner used when he lived in the vicinity at the time. There is a desperate bid, basically, to find some evidence for which he can be charged related to the Madeline McCann abduction and murder before he gets released from prison after a conviction for a rape of a tourist in the similar area. Do you think, though, that these resources should still be going into, the huge resources that are still going into the search for Madeline?
Well, it's such a high-profile case, I guess it just takes on its own momentum after a while. It's the sort of thing where, because it's been sustained not just by the mystery and the horror of this particular story, but also how long it's taken to establish this primary suspect, how also unfortunately the kind of hucksters and the people wanting to comment on it and pontificate about it, kind of amateur true crime that surrounds it now. I think therefore there's always going to be an interest if there's any kind of scrap of evidence.
I mean, it makes front page news in some newspapers today.
Absolutely, and whether or not that fixation on this story is necessarily helpful is another question.
I mean, there's an argument if this man, and again, he's not been charged with any crime in relation to Madeline McCann, if this man is guilty of this crime or is charged with this crime and found guilty, then that is in public interest for this man not to be out on the streets. We already know he's a paedophile. We already know he's a rapist.
And he's due for release in September, I understand. So there's obviously, if you from the German authorities' perspective, there's a sense that there's a pressing need. If there is even a whiff of evidence here that might actually incriminate him, that of course it would be in the public interest to do so. There's always two layers in it. There's the case itself and the clear criminal justice justifications for continuing to look into this, but then there's also, unfortunately, the quite pure interest which has already surrounded it.
Yeah, absolutely. Your thoughts very welcome on this as well. 0344 499 1000. Do get in touch. Lots to talk about with this defence review, whether it's the burning of the Quran, any of the topics we are talking about. Get in touch. As I say, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk to your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1. Standard network rate message. We'll get to those messages up next. This is Talk.
Lord Hermer is a danger to the United Kingdom. He is also completely wrong when he suggests that the ECHR in any way has a legitimate democratic representation in this country. It is essentially an undemocratic court, and it breaches the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that it should hold sway in the United Kingdom. It is anti-democratic in its very existence, and Hermer must know this.
Yeah, Roger, we're with you all the way. Johnny says, imagine people being offended by someone burning a bit of paper. It's a fair point. Graham says this is slowly becoming less and less backdoor in terms of a blasphemy law. Jasmine says we're all doomed unless British people wake up fast. Just look at the protests on the streets of London. They aren't exactly hiding their intentions, calling for an intifada. And Larry points out blasphemy laws for one religion, it seems. Well, exactly, only one religion. Let's go to the phone lines. Ed is in Derbyshire and wants to have his say. Good morning to you, Ed.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. What do you want to say?
Well, a couple of points, really. Regarding the Quran, it's full of hate speech, really. It's.
I've not read it, so I can't. In what way hate speech?
Well, I'll give you an example. Seek out and kill Jews and Christians wherever you may find them. Jews and Christians are the worst of all creatures.
That's written in the Quran? I can't...
It's in the Quran.
OK.
There's also... the reason why Muslims don't mix is because if they do, they mix with non-Muslims, they are seen as Jews or Christians and therefore up for apostasy.
Okay, but here's the thing. There's quite a lot of stuff that's written in the Old Testament of the Bible as well, which is pretty violent. I mean, the world was a pretty nasty place when both of these books were written many, many years ago. But most Muslims don't walk around doing that. Just like most Jews and Christians don't act out the Old Testament in terms of their daily lives either.
Exactly. Well, the reason for that is, like you said earlier to another guest, you mentioned eye for an eye. That's nothing to do with violence. That's to do with judgment. Moses was struggling to judge the people. Okay. And then also, Jews don't stone anyone anymore. You know, in the Old Testament,
there are a number of Muslim countries, Muslim-run countries around. I mean, they are, you know, it's a state religion. It is required. We're actually leaving that religion. We see what's happened in Pakistan. I mean, people are literally being stoned to death. People being imprisoned. I mean, in some countries, executed for leaving the religion. There are obviously different issues. But here's the thing: whatever one's views on the Quran, right or wrong, and again, I think people should be entitled to have any view. They hold any view whatsoever, as long as they're not actually hurting anyone physically or threatening them. Should people be burning the Quran?
Well, if they bought it with their own money, they're allowed to do what they like with it.
Yeah, that's kind of my view.
And regarding just another point, regarding Keir Starmer's type of politics, it's social Islam that he's pushing, not socialism, social Islam. We are bending over backwards to accommodate Muslims in this country. But not so much Muslims, because most Muslims are fine.
Well,
but these Islamists.
I was just going to come in. They're completely different. Again, I've got an issue with any adherents of any sort of strong ideology, whether that is Islam or anything else. But we have an issue with Islamism. I don't have remotely an issue with anyone of any religion, as long as it's not in any way threatening other people. But Islamism is a political ideology that I think is incompatible with British fundamental views and freedoms.
I see someone on an interview a little while back, and he said Islam was spread by the sword, and Christianity was spread by the towel, because Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, and
that's interesting.
The difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament is Christians have a new covenant. It's love and forgiveness. That's what Jesus taught.
Okay.
But the Old Testament, it was, that's for the Hebrews and the Jews.
The thing is, though, when you think of the Crusades and you think about the religious battles in this country and the number of people who died, it's not always been lovely and cosy. I think we need to be fair about that. But the point is, we had a kind of a sort of a renaissance, change in our relationship with religion in the West, which has not happened in terms of relation between religion and people in Islamic countries. And that, I think, is in terms of the reform of the religion and bringing it into the, let alone 21st century, I mean, even the 19th century, I would say. Ed, thank you for that call. Ashley's on the line in London. Ashley, what do you want to say?
Good morning.
Morning.
What I was going to say, look, I don't have an issue with the fact that he was arrested per se. When you look at what not about the Quran, by the way, it's about the fact that if he was arrested for breach of the peace, he set stuff on fire.
He wasn't arrested for breach of the peace.
Right? No, but what I'm saying is that I can understand if he was.
Yeah.
But what he burned is irrelevant, right? It really genuinely is. I mean, they can burn whatever they want. They can burn my Siddur, they can burn a Bible. If that's their choice, that's their choice. The problem we have is that a lot of the young in this country, a lot of the politicians are veering towards the Islamic thought. And, I've got lots of people on my road that are Muslim, and we all get on very well, right? And they're very nice people, right? What I do find is quite a lot of the young seem to be following this kind of rule. And
the ideological, the political ideology, yeah.
And this is the problem, right? A lot of the young, maybe not so much of the old, but then you've got outside sources that are, in effect, infiltrating into our government, we've got 5 of them that are sitting in the House at the moment. And
these are MPs for Gaza, effectively, aren't they?
These are MPs for Gaza. So these are people who slowly, they did it in Lebanon, same thing to the Christians in Lebanon, and that's that they slowly implement things. They basically make things to become acceptable, and when they're strong, they obviously have the upper hand and do what they want, right? So we're seeing at the moment a stage where you can't say anything at all about anything. I don't care. If someone wants to talk about my religion, I'm Jewish. If they want to talk about religion, they're entitled to their opinion. I might not agree, but whatever. We'll all get on, move on.
Yeah.
With this is a knife coming out and stabbing you, right? Because you disagree with what they want. You're seeing that, Golders Green. If you remember, a few years ago, we had the cars driving down, calling for the rape of all the
going down, driving further down from Government Road. No charges.
Nothing. No charges. Nothing. I mean, I'm sure someone in the government probably said, "Oh, it's about the context." Well, yeah, I mean, context rape, eh? But it's only going to get worse, and unless someone has the you-know-whats to stand up and say, "Do you know what? You can have your beliefs, whatever it is, but this is what we do in this country. We live together." And that's
I don't think our politicians do, and they won't actually follow through. And we need to not say the fact that someone was provoked apparently into attacking someone because they burnt a Bible and burnt a Quran, and then blame the person who burnt the Quran for that provocation. It's just outrageous. Ashley, thank you for your call. Very interesting. 11:34 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. Up next, going to be talking about that investigation ongoing investigation to search for Madeline McCann's body, and we're going to talk about what's going on with the water industry, whether or not Thames Water is going to survive. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater's editor of Spiked Online and joins me now. Just going to talk more about Madeline McCann. Now, Tom and I, you and I were talking about, we're talking, it's so many years since Madeline McCann went missing in 2007, and whether or not the police resources have gone in from Britain. I mean, millions have been spent on the search after abject failings by the Portuguese police, but the Germans now currently searching basically for traces of her body in Germany. And just to reiterate, your concern is, there is an argument for it to prevent a possible paedophile being let out of prison, but there's also a big issue in terms of priorities. Oh no, absolutely. I mean, Christian Bruckner, the main suspect now in these investigations, he's currently serving a prison sentence for rape of someone else at this particular resort, but he's due out in September, so you can totally understand why the German authorities, or any set of police authorities, if there is even a tiny hint of more evidence that might actually pin him for this particular area where they're searching is being described as this kind of rat run somewhere that he was clearly frequenting. So
it makes perfect sense on paper to look at that. I guess it's the sort of thing where, because this has been going on for so long, there's been so many false dawns in this particular investigation in all of the different forms that it's taken, that people can't help but be a little bit sceptical as to whether it will turn up anything.
Yeah, indeed. We've had this many times before, have we not? Well, let's speak now to Danny Shaw, who's a Home Affairs commentator who joins us right now. A very good morning to you, Danny.
Hi, Julia. Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. I mean, this story has been ongoing for so many years. I had a 6-month-old when she went missing, and I have to say, bore an uncanny resemblance to Madeline McCann in her late years. And I have to say, always, I think a lot of people are fascinated by the story, mostly because of sort of the there but for the grace of God for many, many parents. Although I think most of us would pay for a babysitter or not leave our child alone. And, you know, we've talked about that many times. But some 30 German police officers and forensic specialists are searching these routes near Praia de Luz. Tell us the detail behind this, and tell us a little bit more about Christian Bruckner, the man who they suspect of this crime.
Well, this isn't the first time that land has been searched near Praia de Luz. You remember 2 years ago, a reservoir was searched. This was an area that was frequented by Christian Bruckner, who's the prime suspect in this case, certainly as far as the German authorities are concerned. And there have been previous searches as well that have all essentially come to nothing. But it feels as though the sense is that this is the kind of last chance for the German authorities to try and find some evidence, to try and find a clue, or indeed to try and find Madeline before they have to release this suspect from custody. He's due to be released in September. He's serving a sentence for the rape of a 72-year-old woman, a US tourist, in 2005. It's due to be freed in September. It's thought that could be pushed back to early spring. Depends on whether he pays a fine that he owes. But in any case, the clock is ticking, because quite clearly he has not been charged with the abduction of Madeline or Madeline's murder or anything to do with Madeline. Therefore, the assumption is that the German authorities do not have enough evidence to press charges. Otherwise, they would have done so. So this search would appear to be a sort of a last gasp opportunity to try and uncover some critical evidence in this case.
And we know he's also a convicted paedophile. And we also know that, I mean, the Sun has revealed extraordinary evidence. There was, I think, in a Channel 4 documentary, that the police have stuff that was found, on his phone, buried in property that he owned, huge number of, little children's swimsuits, and horrific conversations and videos involving, rape of young children, conversations talking about what they wanted to do to children. I mean, there's an awful lot of sort of circumstantial evidence that people will be looking at. But the crucial point here is, after all these many years, is finding a body.
Yes, and that's what the search is presumably about, or some other crucial evidence. I mean, as you said, a very strong circumstantial case. This man is a paedophile who has got interest in little girls, and a sexual obsession with little girls. He was also in Portugal at about that time, and actually in the location, near the location where Madeline disappeared.
He had a conversation with someone else about having killed her, did he not?
And it's alleged that he had a conversation with someone that suggested that he had killed her. So there is some good evidence, but clearly not enough direct evidence to link him to Madeline's abduction and possible murder at this stage. So, I mean, this is an extensive search. I think that it's important to point that out. It's not just something, a couple of people sort of having a quick look around. It's due to go on for the rest of the week. There are 30 German officers there. There are apparently 21 different plots of land where the German police have been given permission by the Portuguese to search. A fire engine, various other vehicles have already arrived at the scene. Searches like this cost a lot of time, money, and take up a lot of resources. So a lot of thought will have gone into doing this. Let's hope they do, uncover some critical evidence in this case which helps resolve it. I mean, it must be agonising for Madeline's parents.
I was just going to ask you about this, because every single time, look, they kept this story in the news because they wanted to find her. They themselves were accused at one point of being suspects by the Portuguese police, who carried out an absolutely hopeless investigation and search in the immediate aftermath of Madeline McCann's disappearance. But they've gone through hell. I mean, the worst possible thing in the world. I mean, the best case scenario is finding their daughter alive. But I suppose the second best scenario is to have some closure. Because we've seen so many cases, haven't we? Austria and America, very, very high-profile cases of children who go missing, who are found years, sometimes even decades later. And you would never, as a mum or a dad, ever be able to give up some hope, would you?
No, I absolutely agree with you. And they've never given up hope. And that's always been their hope, that Madeline is somewhere alive. But I think they're also realists as well. And they will understand the German investigators' view that Madeline has died, and the belief from the German prosecuting authorities that she died at the hands of Christian Bruckner. And they will be watching the search. They will be aware of all of this. I'm sure they'll be getting updates from family liaison officers based in Leicestershire, from Leicestershire Police. But it's absolutely horrendous for them. They've just sort of gone through the anniversary, which comes up every year, of her disappearance, which must bring back all the memories of that awful time. And now we're having the search played out on our TV screens.
Once again,
media.
Indeed. And again, your heart goes out to them. But there has been a lot of criticism of not just the Portuguese police, but also the cost of the British police. And I think the very, very fair point that blonde-haired, pretty little white girl of middle-class parents, both doctors, going missing, and all of the resources that went into that, them able to go and speak to a Prime Minister himself and get extra resources. I mean, I think £10 million plus on the search. So many children go missing. And the research is nothing like this. The resources are nothing like this. The media coverage is nothing like this. There is a lot of criticism that so much energy has been put into and resource put into this one little girl. Now, if it's your own child, absolutely. But what do you make of that criticism?
I think it's fair criticism, but I think we'd all do the same in that situation.
Absolutely.
We would all go to whatever lengths possible to try and find our child. And it's not the only one. You think of Ben Needham in that case, in Yorkshire, the boy that went missing in Greece. Again, a huge amount of coverage, and you would press all those buttons, wouldn't you? And so you can't blame the family for that.
No.
There are questions possibly for the Home Office that every year, for I don't know, the past 15 years, they've approved a large sum of money to go specifically to the Metropolitan Police to carry out its work in relation to this. I'm sure that will come under intense scrutiny. Does that money still need to be paid, or is it now in the hands of the German authorities? Should they just take the lead in the investigation? So, and you're absolutely right. 300,000 plus people go missing every year, and they don't get the level of service and investigation that this case does.
You know what would have been cheaper? A babysitter. I'm saying we're all thinking it. We're all thinking, or someone staying at home with the kids. 3 little children, 2 of them babies. Every other parent, one of them would have been.
I think every parent has had those conversations, and had those conversations back in 2007, Julia. And as you were the mother of, I was the mother. I was the father of 2 young boys at that time, and
we all
those
had
conversations were also had and had
Again,
by lots of parents as well.
Still wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I wouldn't wish them to have that their child to pay such a terrible penalty. And I know we're all thinking that, but you can't help just thinking, they're but for grace. Danny Shaw, really appreciate you joining us, Home Affairs commentator. Tom Slater, your thoughts on that?
Well, it's one of those things, isn't it, where you can see both sides of the concerns in
terms
this.
Of the cost,
in terms of the cost, in terms of how long it's been going on.
Because those are resources that aren't going into searching for other little children.
Oh, no, absolutely. And it's just one of those unfortunate things that the more high profile the case, the more resources tend to get put towards it. I mean, obviously, as we've been talking about previously, with Bruckner in prison currently, serving a rape conviction, he's previously been convicted on paedophile charges. There is this evidence, this USB stick, these disturbing images which have led investigators to believe that he may well be responsible here. You can understand that there's an immediate public safety justification to doing this, But at the same time, over the years, people have seen many false dawns, many similar investigations like this. The British did one not too long ago to try and look below the ground there and didn't find anything.
Yeah,
so
exactly. I'd kind of say, I think we can trust the Germans a bit more than the Portuguese police, though, judging by how they handle this. But do we want this man, Christian Bruckner, out on the streets? I think we do not. 11:48 is time. We're going to take a break. Then we're going to try and find out what the heck is going on in the water sector, the water industry. Why are we having sky-high bills, companies going under, huge amount of money being paid out, apparently in profits, to directors and to shareholders, and yet we've got pollution in our rivers, and we're probably, despite the miserable weather this week, going to be facing yet more bans on using our hose pipes this summer. What's going on? We'll try and find out up next. This is Talk.
But this big sort of commitment or ambition that he wants to spend 3% by the end of the next Parliament, 2034, is just that. It's kind of an ambition. It's a bit woolly. It's a commitment, but how's he actually going to get there? Where is the firm detail of actually spending that money and getting to that level? So it's all very well and good saying you're on a war footing and Russia's this big threat, but how can that be the case if you're not going to spend the money or you're not going to spend it in time when you're ready or we're not?
Landmark review by the Independent Water Commission, led by the former Bank of England Deputy Governor Sir John Cunliffe. He said public trust has been shaken by pollution, financial difficulties, mismanagement and infrastructure failures. This comes on the same day that we learned that the approved preferred bidder to take over Thames Water, this is the private equity giant KKR, has pulled out of plans to invest in Thames Water and save it from collapse. So will we have to take it into public ownership? Will it go into administration? Bearing in mind it's our biggest water company, providing water to a fifth of the population. What do we do in that case? Well, let's talk about all of this with Angela Knight. She's a former chief executive of Energy UK and a former Treasury Minister. A very good morning to you, Angela.
Good morning, how are you?
Very well indeed. Better off than the water sector with Transpan. Now, these are only interim findings from this report, but looking at that first of all, I mean, he's basically criticising the water companies, the government, but also Ofwat, who is supposedly on the side of the consumer and protecting our interests, clearly failing to do so.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it does the three, doesn't it? It says the three blames. It says the businesses themselves, the regulator and the government. It has that in there too, as not having a clear government direction. If we go to the regulator, I mean, the regulator every so often sits down with each of the water companies and looks at what they are allowed to charge the consumer. So it looks at it from the consumer perspective. Huge pressure, of course, to keep the water bills down. Well, as you know yourself, you can't keep a bill down and do the investment.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that I'm excusing the companies in any way, but there's been for a long time a clear mismatch, and Ofgem has basically, in my view, just not done its job.
Ofwat in this. They're all, I have to say, I don't think none of the regulators have been doing their job in any of it. We normally talk to you about energy, your former area of expertise. But this is the thing. What a lot of people don't understand is, there's shortages of water all the time because we don't have enough reservoirs. We had 2 announced last week they're going to be built, but they won't be built for a decade or so. We have loads and loads of rain, and then we get a couple of weeks without rain, and then we have a hose pipe ban. Meanwhile, 20% of our water is lost through leakages. The pipes aren't mended. Water companies say, we've got no money for any of this. It's not our fault because we're not allowed to put the bills up. Meanwhile, they're giving their directors bonuses, and they're handing out billions to their shareholders. But that's where all the money's going, right?
Well, yeah, partly, but partly not, actually, Julia. I mean, you're absolutely right. It gets a bit ridiculous when you see that the pay is one thing, but actually pay is sort of totemic, but it's not really important. But nobody's going to invest in a business unless they get a return. So clearly they have got to give a return to their shareholders. One of the reasons why we don't have reservoirs is the huge problem of actually getting planning permission and cutting through what are often very complicated environmental considerations to get there. And then on the...
but that's a government failure, isn't it? That's a complete government failure for 30 years, I think.
And don't forget that we do pull water out of what they call aquifers, because it's all that rock that sits underneath the earth, and lots of it stores water as well. But our population has gone up. We're building strongly in some areas which are naturally dry, like East Anglia, and the provision of services, of which water is one, has not taken place. So if the proposition, which I hope they get to quickly from this independent review, is bung all the regulators that are relevant together and just get on with the job and be sensibly explaining to you and me and everybody else that we've got to pay for sewage, we've got to find the breaks in the pipe businesses, these are your priorities, then we'll get somewhere. But if we fanny around playing politics with it, we won't. And meanwhile, with Thames Water, there are some other alternatives for investment in Thames Water. And looking at the commentary chain today, I'm actually very uncomfortable with some of the comments that have been made about KRR backing out, because it does flag politics as one. And we've got a whole load of people saying nationalisation. The best interest for us is to have the private sector pick up and sort out Thames Water, not us. And as I say, sensible plan going forward of how we get the with the regulation in the right place, so we get the sewage fixed, we get the pipes fixed. We will have to pay more, but let's get a balance to that proper debate.
But we're happy to. I think we're happy to pay more as long as we know that a load of that money isn't going actually being paid shareholders. I mean, if you're not, but surely the government and Ofwat making sure you have to do the stuff we've required you to do as part of your deal of having this control, because it's a monopoly. I mean, I'm one of the fifth of the country who has Thames Water producing the water. Well, so if I don't think they're doing a good job, I can't switch to another company. So there should be far more regulation. Well, a lot of people would argue there's not much argument for it being a national. Private, you can have private company people running it, but I'm not quite sure the purpose of it being privatised when it's a natural monopoly.
Well, it was privatised years ago for the purposes of getting that extra investment in.
How's that worked out?
Well, I think it probably has, because otherwise, what are you going to spend your money on? Sewage or a hospital? And those are the sorts of trade-offs that a government has to do. So the proposition which says, put this out to the private sector and then regulate it well, because
so they have to do it. That's a very bad argument against. Well, it's a good argument against bad governance, isn't it? What the governments are admitting, they make really bad short-term choices, which we know they regularly do. Just finally, that we talk a lot about there's so much stuff. I mean, everyone gets Phil Sharkey on as the expert on this, as that there's too much sewage in our rivers. There is too much sewage in our rivers, I'm sure. However, a lot of the reason why we think there's a lot more sewage in our rivers now than previously is because we actually test more rivers, don't we? If you only test like 2% of rivers, you won't find as much sewage.
Well, we test so much. We test beach water, we test all these things, which is a good idea. I mean, dare I say it, I'm of the age where you swam in sewage-infested sea. That doesn't mean that I just...
And we were better for it.
But it happened. And I'm not justifying, and I'm saying that clear up is a good idea. Testing is important, but like everything, you need to put the balance of the debate in, because if one says one thing's good and the other thing's bad and it's complicated, then you're going to come out with the wrong answer.
Okay. Angela Knight, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Slater, just a couple of moments, but just, we need to deal with this then, sort this system out, don't we?
I know it's been an abject failure on any possible measure. If you think about the lack of investment in the infrastructure, that's been absolutely shocking. If you think about the level of service people are experiencing whilst bills continue to go up, then you find out about the bonuses and the dividends and all the rest of it. It's like they're laughing in our faces at this point.
I think they are actually laughing in our faces. So they really are. While running the tap. So much more to come. More from Tom Slater. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, great to have your company. Great also to love the company of editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. Lots more to talk about in this hour, including that strategic defence review. And aren't we going to spend 3% of GDP on defence? And now, in the breaking news in the last few moments, reports that NATO wants the UK to spend and could try to force the UK to spend 3.5% on defence. Well, we're not even up to 2.5% right now. So what are the likelihood of that? Plus, we're going to be talking about the latest madness involving the total inability of people to basically obey the law as was ruled by the Supreme Court, and as basic common sense about what is a woman. A Brighton beach sauna, a little hut basically on the beach, has been accused of bowing to the woke mob and breaking the law after it said it had been wrong to ban transgender women from a women-only event. They were banned because they're men and therefore not allowed to go to a women-only event. I'm not sure that should be complicated. Plus, we're going to be talking more about the impact of the creeping blasphemy laws after the conviction of a protester who set fire to a Quran in front of the Turkish embassy. All that coming up. Can't wait to hear more of your thoughts on that. We'll be talking to top guests on that, including Nick Timothy, a Conservative MP, former advisor to Theresa May when she was Home Secretary and Chief of Staff when she was in Number 10, about the Quran burners conviction. He has actually got a bill to be introduced to Parliament today that would make the law explicit that there is freedom to criticise religion. We'll talk to him live from College Green about that. Get more of your thoughts in. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. As I say, Tom Slater is with us, and we're talking defence. You and I were talking a little bit earlier about with Sir Dr. former Dr. Liam Fox, former Defence Secretary, about whether or not the Defence Review is actually going to be sufficient to protect us, but also crucially whether there's the money. And perhaps that's the wrong way of looking at things, like, here's the money, here's the percentage of GDP, and here's what we can spend, as opposed to what we need to protect ourselves, make this country battle ready. And therefore, what does that cost? Well, then we'll have to spend it. Do you think they kind of got it the wrong way around?
A little bit. I think they have a tendency towards just looking at this purely as a sort of spreadsheet exercise. I mean, that's politics in general now, isn't it? Yeah. This purely bean counting, technocratic way of looking at things, rather than starting from the position of what kind of outcome do you want, what kind of society do you want, what kind of capability do you want. It's purely around what can we afford and where can we pinch the pennies. Obviously, how you raise money for this is important. Where the money comes from is a perennial question in politics. But at the same time, what's interesting is it's already getting away from them. They've said that 3% is an aspiration in the next Parliament, at which point there could easily be a different government in charge. And yet things are already moving on. NATO talking about 3.5% being the floor. I mean, and you're already seeing a lot of countries moving closer and closer towards those kinds of numbers anyway. So it would be very typical of this government if they expend all of this hot air talking about their lofty ambitions only for them to be eclipsed by what other partners are.
Indeed, very interesting. Well, let's talk to our next guest on this, Andrew Fox. You know him well on the show, defence expert. He's a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. He's also a former major in the Parachute Regiment. A very good afternoon to you, Andrew.
Hi, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. So a lot of debate over the Strategic Defence Review yesterday. Just in terms of just a brief summary of what there was announced that you do support in terms of, spending money, 2.5%, this ambition of the 3%, in terms of what it's going to be spent on these nuclear submarines, munitions factories and the like. Have they got the right priorities, at least?
I think so, roughly at the strategic level. They're making the right noises, quite frankly. And we have to remember that a strategic defence review is the big hand stuff. It's where the government of the day wants to get to with defence. It doesn't go into the sort of the granular detail of how many tanks we have or how many divisions or how many soldiers in an artillery battery. That sort of detail is not what it's involved with. So when we're talking about reindustrialising our ammunition supply, good thing. When we're talking about building more submarines to establish deterrence to our enemies, that's a good thing. When we're talking about looking at the future and how we network and use autonomy in drones and things like that, also a good thing. So there's stuff in there which I really like. Looking after our service personnel better is in there. Recruiting better is in there. These are huge.
And those do make a difference. Having decent accommodation. I think it was 1.5 billion being announced for accommodation, because basically it's accommodation. It's not good enough for asylum seekers, but it's good enough for our servicemen and women and their families. So that will, in terms of retaining good people, is absolutely vital. But this debate has been so much about, and it's absolutely fascinating. No one even mentions the actual billion-pound numbers. What does it actually mean? 2.3% currently, pushing it up to 2.5% by later in this decade. Talk about 3% early next decade. Again, that assumes whoever's in power then makes that decision. But a report in the last 20 minutes or so suggests that NATO is going to push to increase defence spending for each country to 3.5% of national income, and basically say, look, that where we are right now isn't really touching the sides, and if we want to be a leading nation in the alliance, we are going to have to be spending an awful lot more. And we know that some of the countries in the Baltics, Poland, although much smaller economies, we know that Germany, a big economy, bigger than us, that they are actually spending a lot more now. They are, I think, from a very low base in Germany, admittedly, but pushing to spend a heck of a lot more. Do we need to be moving to that sort of figure?
It's a matter of selling the threat to the British people and justifying why you're spending that much of GDP on defence when there are huge problems with
not on nurses,
Yeah. So are we in a place in the UK where the threat is quite as real as it is for Eastern Europe or Germany? Probably not. And I think that is the political constraint that sits on this document, is that the money's going to have to come from somewhere. Now, the SDR is very clear that this is an alliance-based plan, which I think in itself is really interesting.
What does that mean?
So it means that everything we do is as part of an alliance. We are designing our armed forces to fit into NATO first.
And so part of that will be that we spend a lot more on nuclear, as one of the two, France and Britain, the only nuclear power European nations. So we spend a lot on that. So we'll have fewer, say, land forces as a result, because that's our contribution.
Yeah, exactly. And what that means is we lose a lot of strategic autonomy. What happens if Argentina reinvades the Falklands? I mean, it's not going to happen because the Argentinians are extremely weak. I'm just using it as an example. Yep. Do we have the ability to conduct anything beyond a quick non-combatant evacuation?
We don't, I've been told by numerous military figures.
Yeah, we don't now, and we're not going to under this defence review. So we've traded strategic autonomy and the ability to do stuff on our own for a role in NATO that will hopefully be a leadership role. But if we now look at how the Europeans are kind of cutting our legs away with their new defensive fund and how they originally wanted to cut us out of it, I think that's a dangerously short.
But also, even, I mean, quite apart from the fact that not one of our allies, including America, came to our aid when Falkland Islands were invaded by Argentina. But in Europe, we've seen the dragging of the feet by the EU over help to Ukraine when we were just getting on with it and America was getting on with it. There is a lot to be said, in or outside the EU, to not have our military and foreign policy, and again, these go hand in hand, in any way constrained by, yes, our friends, our neighbours and our allies, but we are, because we're a naval nation, we have, colonial commitments as well around the world that many of those countries don't, that we do actually have different national interests quite a lot of the time to those nations. We shouldn't constrain ourselves in that way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there is a danger here that this review over-focuses on Russia to the exclusion of any other threat anywhere else in the world. I mean, it talks about small-scale counter-terrorism stuff of the line that we've done against ISIS or Daesh in the Middle East. But that was, that was primarily a special forces operation supported by airstrikes. It wasn't a conventional military deployment. And essentially, those conventional military deployments are looking like a thing of the past under this review.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the thing about all of this is, does any of it really touch sides of what we really need? Now, I mean, you're right. Now, I don't think anyone thinks that Russia is going to suddenly appear on a whole load of boats and then their military invade our country. Of course not. That's not what happened, in the Second World War with Germany either. There was seizing of European nations. We were under threat from the air, under threat from sea and everything, but we had to, a lot of our actions was to defend our allies in Europe and prevent that advance from the Nazis. The threat from Russia is further afield. Is it as real, though? That's the thing, because we spoke to Lord Dannatt this time yesterday, former head of the British Army. He probably knows what he's talking about, eh? And he said that in terms of our attempt to, these funds to build up our military to the point where we were capable of defending ourselves and our allies, it was the equivalent of us saying in 1937 to Nazi Germany, would you mind awfully waiting until 1946 before you invade other countries because we're not ready yet? Do you think that's the territory we're in now?
Yeah, I think there's an element of that if we're serious about supporting the Eastern European Baltic states for what is almost certain to be an attack by Russia in the next 10, 15 years.
You say almost certain?
I would say so. And I think the way it'll be done will be exactly the playbook that we saw in Georgia and that we saw in Ukraine, where it starts with subversion, it starts with disinformation, it starts with sabotage operations, it starts with serious messaging against domestic governments on pro-Russian domestic populations.
Yeah. More Russian-speaking populations moving to those places as well.
Yeah, exactly. And only then will they escalate to military action if they think those are until the conditions are set, ready for their military force to actually go. And that does take time, and that's the time we have now to get ready for that defensive piece. And again, in the SDR, it's good to see that we're talking about resilience to that kind of grey zone operation, as they call it.
I get the very strong impression from all the military people I speak to that certainly former military more able to speak out. There's no reason to think they think very differently from the military people right now, the senior echelons and junior echelons, that they get it. They believe there is a threat. We've got Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary of Defense, talking about an imminent threat to Taiwan from Xi Jinping of China. And again, no reason to think that isn't the case. Russia has been building up forces, near the Nordic states. He's expressed his desire to expand, back to the Soviet borders at some point. The military get it. Is it clear that the politicians get it, and is it clear that the bean counters, the civil servants, get it?
I think Keir Starmer has had a good Ukraine. In his time in. It's probably his.
He stood firm.
The best thing. So I think he does understand it. And again, the Treasury is always where the blockage is. And if you speak to Ben Wallace, for when he was in the Defence Secretary job, that is his. The clear target of his criticism is always the Treasury. But you can see why, because there's a limited amount of cash. So one of two things: we either take it from somewhere else, or we raise taxes. Neither of which are politically popular decisions. So short-term political expediency often takes priority over these things. Where in countries like Russia and China, where they don't have to worry about their electorates, they can think much more long-term than we do, and that is a perennial problem for Western democracies when they're planning for their own defences.
I mean, one of the key things about defence spending is it takes a heck of a long time to deliver. It takes a heck of a lot of money to deliver as well. So you need to be planning always, way in advance. And we know that we've got, Ukraine's on a war footing. They have to be. Russia is on a war footing. Certainly the Chinese are on a war footing. You look at, were they spending something like 8% of their GDP on military now, building up most extraordinary forces. Again, why do we think they're doing that? Just out of the goodness of their hearts for the military? I mean, come on, people. There are these, failing to miss the signs of the Ukrainian invasion where they were blatantly obvious. I want to invade Ukraine and take it back. I'm putting 120,000 troops on the border, and I've got a load of tanks. I mean, really, was it a surprise? It shouldn't have been to anybody. We need to take these warnings seriously. But crucially, in terms of what we're actually doing, do you think that we would be able to actually repel a Russian invasion of our NATO allies? Do you think the Americans would, come to aid? What about, the Poles, new president elected in Poland, who believes that the role of, although less pro-EU than the other candidate, but he feels like the role of Poland is better outside NATO than inside it. What do you make of the willingness and ability of the West to take on Vladimir Putin and other threats?
It comes down to certainly writing off America at this point. I think all the messaging coming out of the White House, we cannot count on them as a reliable partner, so we need to write that part off and make sure that what we have is enough to repel Russia. And actually, a lot of Russia's military capability has been revealed to be a paper tiger over the last few years in Ukraine. Most notably the S-400 air defences, which Israeli F-35s wiped off the battlefield in Iran very easily. And the Ukrainians haven't been able to completely get air dominance because they've got parity on the ground there. So we've got a really good lesson from the Middle East. And that is that F-35s, which Ukraine doesn't have, can defeat Russia's air defences. And if you can defeat air defences, you can achieve air superiority. Yeah. And if you achieve air superiority, then you win. So I think we do have the abilities, we do have the capabilities to beat Russia on the battlefield. Russia, of course, will look at that and they will adjust their tactics accordingly, and they will go for a sort of salami slice approach where they don't ever quite reach the threshold of war until it's too late.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to be very careful of our enemy's clever tactics.
Yeah, and he's shown that again and again, has he not? Andrew Fox, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Slater, let's come back to you. I mean, one of my concerns is not just our ability to fight a war, it's our willingness. Now, people say, oh, you're a warmonger, whether it's in Gaza or whether it's in Ukraine. Always going to... No, I just accept the reality. And I think actually history would show us that actually war is a more natural state of affairs for human beings than peace, sadly. That said, democracies don't go to war. One of the reasons I want democracy to be spread, it's better for human beings, it's better for people's quality of life, their quantity of life, and indeed for preventing wars. I mean, these things really do matter. But do you think that the British people, do you think Western nations are willing to fight for their rights?
I mean, there's definitely a bit of a problem there, the way in which you've got governments which are pumping out a kind of self-loathing message all of the time. That's only going to degrade... Reparations
for slavery.
Everything we've ever done is bad.
Yeah.
We're really divided, we're really racist, you'll hate each other. That's not useful, is it, from a perspective of national unity? That being said, I think Ukraine is, in some respects, a much more extreme example of how, when the chips are down, a lot of divisions that did previously exist in society melt into air. There was a lot of divides in that society.
Well, a lot of Remainers discovered the value of national borders all of a sudden. Actually, I thought was fascinating.
Absolutely, because the thing is, the point at which you're invaded by an adventurous foreign power is the point at which you're defending not just your country, the idea of it, its history and whatever, although I'm sure that's front and centre for a lot of people, but your community, your town, your family, your friends. It's a very different thing. So whilst we are going to see the polls talking about, what percentage of Gen Z aren't particularly patriotic or won't be willing to die for their country and so on,
change the tune.
Things change when the
I hope so. I mean, you've been at school more recently than I, but even I, my bog standard comp, we weren't taught, but the sort of young people are taught now in terms of sort of how terrible your country is and how the West is awful. It's like, yeah, that's a big worry for me. Look, there's so much more to talk about. Love to hear your thoughts on this. Got lots of time for calls in the coming 40 minutes. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. In a couple of moments, we're going to be talking about the latest madness of people refusing to abide by that trans women's ruling from the Supreme Court. First up, though, we're giving you the chance to win FIFA Club World Cup final tickets, thanks to our friends at DAZN. Here's everything you need to know.
Hi, it's Jim White here. Here at TalkSport, we're gearing up for the Club World Cup in the United States. And to celebrate, we've got 2 tickets to the final in New York on July the 13th to give away. We'll sort flights, accommodation, and give you $5,000 spending money to spend however you like. 18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. All you have to do to enter is text the word football to 83338 by the 13th of June at 11 p.m. and you're in the draw. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission or send your name and number by post to Club World Cup Final Prize Draw, P.O. Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on June the 18th.
This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Right, don't miss out on that incredible giveaway thanks to our friends over at DAZN. Very good luck to you. We'll take a quick break. Up next, Maya Forstater from Sex Matters. This is Talk.
well, it's not getting any better, is it? You know, they haven't listened to any of the unions. They haven't listened to any of the protests we've had, and it's all been peaceful. It's all been sensible, and it's all trying to start a discussion with these people. We're seeing job losses already, you know, in some of these tractor companies. Now, you know, if you're going to tax an industry like this, people are going to slow down on spending, slow down on investing, and
not, and who is and who's not a woman. A very good afternoon to you.
Hello, Julia.
The latest, I mean, whether it's a hospital, whether it's the NHS, whether it's anyone else, this time it's Beachbox Spa in Brighton. Extraordinarily. It looks like it's a little shed on the beach. I'm sure it's lots of fun. They had decided to hold a women-only sauna session for women. That was the plan. It was just like, you know, how lovely. Women might want to just go in a sauna, not with any blokes present, not unreasonable. Then big backlash, bearing in mind it is Brighton. Very big, as one critic said, we are a queer city, they said. So they said that this is outrageous because trans women are women and they should have women there as well. So trans women, i.e. men, there as well. Beachbox Spa has now been accused of giving into the woke mob after it said sorry for excluding trans women, i.e. men, from the women-only session last Thursday. I've got to say, I feel a little bit sorry for them. I think they've been caught in the middle. They tried to obey the law, they got told off, they backed down, they've apologised to everybody, formal statement, and now they're having I don't know what this even means, a queer sauna session as well. But the main thing here is really simple, isn't it? Like, there's a law and everyone has to obey it.
You'd think so. I mean, I think you're right. I think they're being bullied. It's a small business. They tried to do something that was completely lawful, completely reasonable, and they got piled on. Yeah. And they backed down, which they shouldn't have done. What they need to have is very clear guidance from the Equality and Human Rights Commission. That will help.
That still hasn't come, has it?
No, it's in process. But it's very hard for a small organisation facing this kind of pile-on. They don't have lawyers on tap, whereas NHS bodies, big employers all do, and they really, really should be following the law straight away. I mean, this small company should too, but I do feel sorry for them. They've been bullied.
And that's the thing in lots of cases, and we have, things like comedians who've been accused of transphobia, i.e. understanding basic biology. They want to do a performance. They're then, it gets publicised. People then threaten to boycott the theatre or the comedy club, and so they give in. These people are banned. A load of this has just come from, and that's the right word. It is just bullying from trans activists, not in anyone's interest, least of all trans people who just want to get on their lives quietly and living how they want to live, with which you and I have no issue whatsoever. But again, understanding that there are times when women would like to have a women-only sauna because of, physical difference between men and women, and that therefore someone who believes they're a woman, they can believe all they want, doesn't make them a woman under the law, and therefore they can't attend. There's nothing bigoted or transphobic about that. It's just obeying the law. You'd think by now that bullying wouldn't work because they haven't got the law to back them up.
And also, I mean, this is the kind of business where you can have all different kinds of events. I mean, like you said, they have a queer sauna.
Whatever that is.
So if people want to mix with, trans women, men, trans men all together, they can do that. That's perfectly lawful. What you need is that people know what they're getting, particularly when they take their clothes off. They know what they're walking into. And, there are lots of people in Brighton who follow gender ideology, but there are lots and lots of just normie women who would like to have a sauna that's female only.
I think that there might be some gay women who would rather that as well. But again,
exactly.
But again, as you say, it just needs to be what's advertised. It is extraordinary how many organisations, and it's not just a little beach hut sauna in Brighton that are having this issue. Again, hospitals. Some sports clubs. We had the victory. We spoke to Sharon Davies yesterday about the Football Association as of Sunday not allowing men who believe they're women or identify themselves as women to play in women's football. That's good. We've seen other sports following suits. But we've still got, hospitals requiring, nurses get changed in the same room with female nurses as men. We've got ongoing cases involving that. We've also got even Parliament. Even the Houses of Parliament have not yet changed their rules in terms of access from trans-identifying men to women's toilets.
And it should now be absolutely simple. The law is simple and clear, and the law has always been what the Supreme Court said it was. This isn't new, it's just been clarified. And so their responsibility is to act now, not to try and wait and push it down the road for the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Yeah. There's really no excuse.
But they didn't listen to the Equality and Human Rights Commission when they were sort of trying to make this clear before the Supreme Court ruling. And again, I'm still as amazed as you are that people need a Supreme Court judge to tell us what is and what is not a woman. It was fairly obvious to both of us already. Are we going to need to have a number of cases to push this forward? Because this has only really come about as a result of a test case about, from For Women Scotland, about allowing men into a women's role. We keep having these cases, but there still seem to be organisations and companies and public bodies paid for by you and me, which are simply refusing to accept the law. But the key thing is, even if these cases go to court, unless it's a person who's a private director of a limited company, they are not paying the cost of this. These organisations, unless if this beach box spa got taken to court, they'd end up with legal costs. Yeah, well, they'd probably give in much quicker. But you've got like a hospital boss who isn't obeying the law, or Parliament. They're not going to have to pay that costs or a fine or anything. It's a free challenge to the law every time. Do we not need to have, I'm sorry, but a little bit of retribution?
No one's lost their job over this yet. People have made bad decisions over and over again, and you're right, no one has lost their job. And I think if people are spending public money in bad ways, there should be accountability. Yeah. But I also think you're right. We're going to need to have more cases, and it may be that it's the insurers that start paying attention, because they're the ones who are actually picking up the money.
And they're going to be saying, "Hey, yeah, you can't do this." Yeah, reality check. And again, a lot of organisations got it very quickly. Madeline Forster, thank you so much for joining us, Executive Director of Sex Matters. Appreciate that. Apologies, by the way, if you're listening and there's a sort of a whirring noise in the background. There seems to be a fan on one of the lights making a lot of noise. Not much we can do about it right now while we're on air, but we'll do our best to sort it. Do bear with us. Apologies for that. Or it could just be my voice. Just I think the sound of the whirring, Tom, is what my husband hears when I speak. It's just white noise in the background. It's the only way of coping after all these decades.
Build up defence mechanisms.
Exactly. You've met him. He's a long-suffering man. Anyway, it is extraordinary, isn't it? You've been a fantastic. I think there's the trans they call it trans ally. You've been a fantastic ally to women. All of you at Spiked, in terms of ally to sanity and biological reality on this. Does it not stun you how many private companies, public organisations, even Parliament, do not understand the sodding law?
It's incredible, especially after all that's happened, especially after the Supreme Court ruling, that was a pretty big story, sort of thing you might have heard about.
Yeah.
Problem is, all of this has been from the off. Yeah, there's been some ideologues in various companies who've been pushing for this stuff. A lot of it is about cowardice. You get an angry email from someone claiming that you're being discriminatory, that you're being transphobic and whatever, and then they turn on a dime. What's unfortunate is that even after the Supreme Court ruling, it still requires more battles to be had, more pushback, and to recognise that there is a genuine cost to, if you want to embrace these kinds of policies which discriminate most actively against women who don't want men in their spaces.
But the key thing about all of this is, so many people, comedians, actors, ordinary people like Madeline Forster lost her job. The people literally lost work. They're forced out of their jobs. Free speech unions, something like 40% of the cases they deal with are people who, men and women, just saying privately in a normal conversation at work, well, no, actually, mean biological women or any kind of women, not trans women, literally losing their jobs, going to tribunals. The penalty, the abuse, the threats, the penalty has been so high on one side, but no penalty on the other side, even when they are, well, we know they were wrong. We didn't need a Supreme Court judge to tell us, but now we've got that Supreme Court ruling. Fine, okay, every sinner who repenteth, we will be welcoming with open arms. But if you're carrying on I want there to be punishment for that, because that's one of my reasons why I've a few times quite successfully helped organise boycotts of stores. If you tell me, was it Wix, that I'm a bigot because I don't believe that trans women are women, fine, I won't give you my business, and I'll tell other people not to give you my business as well. You should be financially punished. You can have that view, but don't call me a bigot and expect me to spend money in your company.
No, absolutely, there's going to be much more of that, but there's also going to be legal implications down the road as well, particularly when you're talking about members of staff and how they've been discriminated against for, we call it gender critical views, just biologically correct views, reality,
understanding biological facts. Gender critical, I've always hated that term. I'll never use it. Makes it sound like a kind of
niche philosophical pursuit.
Yeah, no, people who understand basic stuff. Right? By the way, that whirring is getting longer and louder. We are going to try and get it mended. We're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to be taking your calls, particularly on blasphemy laws, after that man who burnt a Koran has been convicted. We're also going to be talking to Conservative MP Nick Timothy about that, coming up live on College Green for the top of the hour. He's actually got a bill going through being introduced to Parliament today that would make the law explicit that there is freedom to criticise religion, because there clearly isn't right now. But just one religion. This is Talk. We are the home of loud whirring noises and common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk without the whirring noise. We think we've sorted it. Anyway, thank you very much for bearing with us. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater is still with us. Let's get to your calls on the blasphemy laws. Look, a lot of you talking just about defence, and a lot of chat about that on the show yesterday, but I think so many of us are really concerned. And, this is a station that has been, we're not just home of common sense, we're basically one of the few homes of freedom of speech as well. But a man who shouted F Islam and burned a copy of the Quran has been found guilty, convicted yesterday of a public order offence in what critics claim is a backdoor blasphemy law. I wonder if this is the sort of thing that actually Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, might bring up tomorrow at PMQs. Well, let's take a call on that. George is on the line. He's in Wimbledon. He's given us a call on 0344 499 1000. George, what do you want to say?
Great show, as always. Thanks, Julia. So one of your callers earlier said that the book itself, the type of book, doesn't matter. And I think it does, because the reason this was inciting hatred is evidenced by the fact that he was very rapidly attacked with a knife by a Muslim. Now, that's because he was burning the Quran. Now, I'm gay. If there was someone burning a pride flag at the end of the street and shouting all sorts of profanities, I'm not going to attack them. If there's someone burning the Bible at the end of the street, no Christian's going to attack them.
Okay.
But this is the problem. It's because it's the Quran.
Well, that's
and religion.
I mean, Tom Slater actually pointed out a brilliant piece. Do right, I should have looked at it on Spike. He pointed out that the great added insult to injury in this is that the district judge involved, John McGarver, who made this decision, he actually pointed out that the fact that Koshkan, the man who was convicted, Hamit Koshkan, who is an asylum seeker from Turkey, where he's an atheist and he's been fighting against Islamification of Turkish sort of public life, which is absolutely a thing. John McGarver, the district judge, said that, weirdly, the fact that he was actually attacked by a passerby armed with a knife and a delivery rider who kicked him while he was on the floor was proof of his guilt. He said that the conduct was disorderly is no better illustrated than by the fact that it led to serious public disorder involving him being assaulted by two different people. And as you say, if any other book or any other thing being destroyed would not provoke that sort of reaction, then by definition there's only a blasphemy law for one book, and that is the Quran.
No, they might apply the same law to all, just to be seen to be equal. But you and I know that no Christian is going to go up and attack or try and stab a Christian or an ex-Christian for doing that. Yep. No more than I would someone with a pride or a trans flag.
So what's the solution to this?
I honestly think the solution is for the authorities to double down, not that they're doubling down on anything, but to say, look, this is about British values. And one of the most important British values is freedom of speech, freedom to... We have Speaker's Corner, for example. It's kind of part of our culture.
Well, people have been attacked at Speaker's Corner.
We know who.
Yeah.
And, I'm married to an Arab who's Lebanese. He's a Christian. I also have gay Muslim friends. And what's fascinating is that I spoke to one of my gay Muslim friends yesterday who said he thought this sentence was right, that he should have been found guilty. And I said, look, if that's how you think, then your values don't match the values of my culture, because I'm British, I'm born here, my family are born here, this is in my blood.
Yeah.
This really is.
Your gay Muslim friend, was he aware of how the Quran and indeed pretty much every Islamic-run country views homosexuality?
This is the irony. This is a terrible irony. And I often say to him...
It's like the Queers for Palestine people who wouldn't last more than 3 minutes.
Well, whenever I have this conversation, my response is, OK, which Muslim majority country do you want to go and live in? Now, I used to live in the UAE. My husband's from Lebanon. It's illegal in both countries. Yeah. So if we're talking about values, which Muslim country do you want to go and live in? The answer is, well, none, because actually... But this is the thing. If someone comes to live here or is raised here, and is a child of migrants or people who've converted or have been here for generations, whatever their religion, whatever their views, part of the deal of being here is accepting those values or trying to change the law but doing it peacefully. But the reality is we've seen these moves to bring a blasphemy law in by the back door, or even actually one Muslim Labour backbench MP asking the Prime Minister a few months ago in PMQs to actually bring in a blatant blasphemy law. But the reality is they only really want it for one religious document. And if you believe in any British values, you have to accept there is a right for people to express criticism however they choose of your religion. I consider my ability to and my right to criticise the government, religion, religious leaders, the monarchy, every institution in this country, the police. It is such a fundamental part of my rights, and a democracy cannot survive without that right. But Julia, they enjoy the right when they go and march against Jews and against Israel. Then they love the right to do that and burn flags, the Israeli flag and all those things we see. Then they take that right as theirs.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Very interesting point, George. Thank you very much indeed for that call. Let's go to Les. He's in Birmingham. Hi, Les. What do you want to say about this?
Oh, hello. Yeah, that's a great caller here.
Yes.
Caller. Well, I wanted to say...
I'm going to say you're feeling the pressure on you now, right?
Oh, well, yeah, very true. Yeah. OK, well, what I wanted to say is I do not agree with anybody burning any holy book at all. I think in truth, it's nasty and it's provocative and it's not a very nice
Should it be
thing.
criminal, though?
Well, that's the thing. I believe it's not for humans to punish there's somebody doing such as burning a holy book.
That's an interesting point.
Well, I don't believe that. I think if you believe your God is omnipotent, which means all-powerful, then it's I believe if somebody was to burn, say, the Bible or something like that, then if you believe they'll
be punished in the afterlife.
They will be punished in the afterlife.
That is the thing, exactly. My thing is here, don't be angry at me for not being of your religion. Just pity me. I'm always fascinated. There's a lot of religious Christian evangelists around my way who'll then try and campaign, and they'll say Jesus loves you. No, I'm really sure he doesn't. Really sure he doesn't. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and so that's what I think, and I think the police were wrong. I think, was he arrested? This guy, I don't know.
He was arrested. He's charged. Convicted.
He's charged.
He's convicted.
Yeah. But I think the guy that came to him with a knife and there's some other threats against him, that is a arrestable offence.
Well, no, and he has been arrested and charged. We're not allowed to know his name. I still don't understand why we're not allowed to know his name, but he denies there was a knife. But he's certainly been charged with some sort of violent offence. But again, the fact that him being apparently provoked to violence was somehow justified the conviction of the man who wasn't being violent is what I think is the terrifying thing. Les, thank you very much, Dee, for that. Tom Slater just finished. It's an interesting point. If you're religious, why are you so concerned about this? I mean, someone who's an apostate, who's left the religion, or somebody who's an atheist like me, I mean, we're going to go and burn in hell anyway. Why are they so concerned? I'm going to get my punishment in the afterlife.
Absolutely, it's pathetic. It's embarrassing. Imagine you feeling so hurt that you think it's justified to do harm to someone, or it's justified to throw someone in prison or to punish them in any kind of way. I think it's embarrassing. Especially
it's a bit insecure, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's one of those things where, regardless of who this comes from, whether it's a trans activist, whether it's a deeply religious person, whether it's a Muslim, Christian, whatever, we've got to treat this as what it is. It's a pathetic response to views that you disagree with.
You don't have the right to not be offended. If you don't like it, walk away. If someone's shouting at you in your face, threatening you, that's a criminal offence.
But that's the message that should go out to everyone, whether they're a student or a firebrand preacher. Grow up if you can't deal with opinions you disagree with across the board.
He told you.
That's so difficult.
He told you. That's Tom Slater. Up next, we're going to talk to Conservative MP Nick Timothy, who's got a bill being introduced to Parliament today to try and ensure that we do actually have a freedom to criticise religion. He's up next. Stay tuned. This is Talk.
This guy, obviously did a very extreme thing, but I do worry that we've lost sight of free speech in this country, and you know, it's why so many Americans look at us and just think, what is going on? You know, especially with this Public Order Act, you know, under which he was charged. I mean, there have been so many amendments over the years. Yep. I think it's stretched beyond all recognition to prosecute people for, you know, things that they're not really, it's not really in balance with whatever that person has done.
Much for joining us. Now, look, you've been writing and talking about these sort of issues of freedom of speech and the need to sort of maintain our fundamental rights for a very, very long time, and I commend you for that. But you're also making efforts within Parliament now. You're an MP. You're introducing a bill in Parliament today. What will it do?
Well, the bill will actually be introduced next Tuesday.
Oh,
it's a 10-minute rule bill, which is a form of private members' bill. And what it does is try to stop this creep towards a de facto blasphemy law that we seem to have now. So yesterday, a man was found guilty of public order offences after he burned a Quran outside the Turkish embassy earlier in the year. And I think it's wrong to use the Public Order Act from 1986 in this way. It's a new thing, and we need to amend the law to make it absolutely clear that there is a right to criticise and protest peacefully and without inciting people against religious beliefs, and in particular Islam, which is where we have these problems emerging.
Well, this is a crucial thing. There is a right to do all of that apart from Islam, and you know that, and I know that, and everyone listening and watching knows that too, and we've seen that again and again, and we've seen many people cowed by this, including, I think, the police, the Crime Prosecution Service, and our politicians as well. We had a backbench Labour MP, a Muslim MP, calling for a blasphemy law, you know, to be brought back in. Only a few months ago in Parliament at PMQs, and I have to say, I did not see the Prime Minister slap that down as I would have wanted and expected. But the thing that's most extraordinary about this case involving this is Hamit Çoskan. He's a Turkish-born asylum seeker. He's protesting not outside a mosque, he's protesting outside the Turkish embassy, a legitimate political protest. He has been persecuted in Turkey, spent time in prison in Turkey because he's an atheist. He's protesting against the Islamification of Turkish life, which has undoubtedly happened under Erdogan. But one of the things the district judge in his case, as he convicted him and fined him £240, this guy John McGarver, who should hang his head in shame, he actually justified as proof of this man's guilt for basically causing a harassment, alarm and distress by his disorderly behaviour. The fact that he was attacked by two other men, a passerby on a moped, but a delivery driver, but also a man who came out of a building allegedly armed with a knife, slashed at him and attacked him and badly hurt him. Now, that man, we understand, has been charged. For some reason, we're not allowed to know his identity, which I think would be something we should want to know. But the idea that because someone is provoked, in their view, to violence, that means you have committed an offence, that only would count for one religion, because there's no evidence that that happens for any other religion, is there?
Well, this is what I think is so perverse about the use of the Public Order Act as a way of introducing, as I say, this de facto blasphemy law, because what it does is put the blame onto the protester and says that somehow they're provoking the behaviour of others, and it doesn't put the blame onto the people who cannot handle legitimate criticism or even mockery of the things they believe in. Now, Parliament decided this many years ago. We scrapped blasphemy laws many years ago. So the views of Parliament actually are clear, and we have ministers. I just asked this question in the House of Commons just now. The Justice Secretary said, well, we don't have blasphemy laws. But this is a nonsense. It's a way of pretending that what's going on isn't really happening. We have to address this, and we have to address it now. Otherwise, you know, I don't know, on the basis of the ruling yesterday, what I or anybody else in this country can say about Islam in public. If I express an opinion and somebody else hears it and they are offended by it, then it could legitimately, according to this ruling, be said that I've committed a Public Order Act offence.
Well, it's interesting that the first charge that was brought against the man, which then was dropped, was the idea that because he'd had offended the religion of Islam. You can't offend an institution. I am absolutely appalled and disgusted by the burqa. I think that is the most repulsive, un-British, un-Western, misogynistic, costume that women are enslaved by. And I am horrified every time I see it on the streets of London, which is a very common sight these days. That probably means I'm guilty of the same crime as this man, doesn't it?
Well, Julia, look, I will say it here and now. My view is we need to have a debate about all of these things before it's too late. My personal view is that the burqa should be banned in Britain.
Yeah, me too.
My personal view is that the hijab shouldn't be allowed on children in schools.
100%.
As you say, according to the logic of the ruling yesterday, if somebody heard me just say this now, perhaps I'm guilty of a public order offence.
Yeah. Here's the thing, though. There's one thing getting a criminal offence and getting a fine £240. There's another thing where you and your family have to go into hiding for the rest of your life because the threat that you will be or your family members will be killed is very real. It's what happened to the Batley Grammar School teacher. It's why he's still in hiding. No charges ever been brought over that. It's what happened to the family who had to go, and the mother who had to go and beg at a local mosque in Wakefield after her son scuffed a copy of the Quran. The police sitting with her. No charges ever brought again against people making death threats against that family. We've seen this happen again and again. The reality is, with or without this law, with or without a law that is officially a blasphemy law, or with or without a law like you're proposing, which says specifically there isn't a blasphemy law, there still is a de facto blasphemy law, and it only impacts one religion, because you would be crazy to risk doing this. You'd be crazy even to make a political statement to do this, because you and your family will be in hiding for the rest of your life.
Yeah, look, I think there's two stages to what we're talking about. The first is the law itself, and that's what my bill seeks to address. We need to change the law to make clear that we have this right to criticise and joke about or mock religious ideas in the same way as we would any other kind of ideas. But then, as you say, there's another side to this, which is what's happening just in practice, and where quite often parts of the state and societal organisations and whatever are facilitating this kind of informal blasphemy law. Sometimes it's the police, sometimes it's councils, and that has to be rooted right out, because if we don't do that, we will not be a free country.
What is the solution, though? We say root it right out. I don't see that the police, who are far too PC for PCs, are going to do anything. I don't see the politicians being brave enough, certainly not this lot, to do anything. What do we do?
Well, here's a politician doing something right now. I think the start is we have to be brave enough to tell the truth, and we have to be brave enough to stand up and say the things we believe in, and we have to be brave enough to make sure, whatever the intimidation, that the law is enforced equally, and that the state treats people on the basis of who they are as individuals, not their clan, not their racial identity, not their religious identity.
Absolutely.
And if we start to do that, and we root out the people in the state who are not prepared to do that, then we will make some progress. It won't be easy, because we're in a very bad way already, but there is a way ahead for us.
Absolutely. Well, I'll be interested to see how your bill progresses in Parliament, what support it gets. Conservative MP Nick Timothy, appreciate you joining us. That's next Tuesday, not today. Tom Slater, I mean, do you think they're kind of already past that breaking point, though?
Well, it certainly feels like it. It feels like any law that we have on the statute books will be warped, will be pressed to try and suppress criticism or blasphemy against this particular religion, which is why we need some kind of corrective. We need to make clear that you can't have public order legislation or disorder legislation.
You can't have hate speech legislation at all.
Because it's going to be abused. That's the problem, because whenever you get into the realm of policing speech and thought and emotion, it's always going to be subjective, and it's quite clearly that the authorities feel under tremendous pressure to censor speech in this direction. So unless you clarify,
we need to come down like a ton of bricks on anybody who does threaten violence in these scenarios and hunt them down. That's the only way of making